and to marry Shireen Baratheon. That's exactly what they want. Lady Lisa said. I know what the lords are thinking. For the sake of alliances, they'll agree to any marriage. He thinks I don't know what he's up to. He wants my sweet Robert to marry Stannis's monstrous daughter. For his plans, you tell me, he wants to persuade the king to hand over my child's Lord of the Eyrie to Stannis. Oh, Lisa, dear. Peter took her hand. No matter what happens, I'll stand by you. Lady Lisa leaned into Peter's embrace, taking advantage of the moment. Thank you, dear. I knew you loved me. Chapter 19, The Curse and the Red God. This is a true story that happened in Pentos, Viserys said, holding a thin storybook and beginning to narrate. It's written in the book. The events took place in the harbor of Pentos, and the author had to go to great lengths to learn about it from a friend. This friend insisted on remaining anonymous, so I will not mention the names of anyone involved. One night, a heavy knock came at my friend's door. When he opened it, he saw his childhood friend, who was in a hurry and looked terrified, begging him for help to save his life. My friend was a warm-hearted, righteous person. Hearing such a plea from a childhood companion, he unhesitatingly invited him in and asked for an explanation. His friend claimed that his life was under threat. The insurance company that provided insurance contracts for merchant ships in the harbor had murdered his father, the captain himself, his uncle, the first mate, and his uncle, the partner of the merchant ship, in order to avoid paying out their shipwreck insurance. As everyone knows, the Free City-States insurance companies are known for operating on commercial integrity. If it were not from his childhood friend, my friend would definitely have thought this accusation was the nonsense of a drunkard or the ravings of a madman. According to his friend, his family's merchant ship was originally scheduled to sail from Pentos to the Summer Islands for trade. They had sailed this route countless times. Buying insurance contracts from the insurance company in Pentos was just a routine to ensure their safety. But something happened on this voyage. During the journey, their ship unfortunately encountered a hurricane. The merchant ship hit a reef in the raging waves, the keel broke, and the ship shattered. The broken hull held on for half a day before sinking into the sea, along with all the cargo. Most of the crew were killed or injured. The survivors drifted at sea for 4 whole days on lifeboats and small boats before being rescued by a passing merchant ship. Having suffered such misfortune, his friend's family had suffered a great loss. The only thing they could rely on was the shipwreck insurance they had purchased before setting sail. Anyone with common sense knew that when it came to actually executing contracts signed between merchant ships and insurance companies, it often took a long time to verify. After all, ships at sea were unsupervised, and one couldn't simply take the insured's word for it. Insurance companies needed a complex process to ensure they weren't being defrauded. Therefore, it was normal for the insured and the insurance company to engage in long-term negotiations, which often lasted from a month to even a year. They, too, had prepared for a long negotiation. Since their home wasn't in the port, after the initial preliminary negotiations, the task of waiting for the insurance company's reply was handed over to his friend's uncle. But during this time of negotiation with the insurance company, his friend's uncle suddenly met with an accident in the city and died. At first, they didn't think it was murder. The reason for his friend's uncle's accidental death was very clear: he had fallen into a water channel and drowned after getting drunk in a tavern at night. In Pentos, such things happened every year. City watch soldiers always fished out drunken fools who had drowned in the water channels that flowed through the city during their morning patrols. So they didn't think much of it, and simply had his friend's uncle continue the previous process of negotiating with the insurance company. 2 weeks later, another accident occurred. His friend's uncle also drowned in a water channel in the city, the cause being the same as his friend's uncle's death. The City Watch reported it to them as a common case of drowning after falling into a water channel due to drunkenness. At this point, his friend's father began to have doubts. He knew his brother well and knew that his brother was a meticulous person who would never have such an accident. So he told his son, the friend who came to meet a knight seeking help, about his suspicions and worries. Because there was no evidence, the insurance company's procedures were still proceeding as usual. After much deliberation, his friend's father, after making preparations, still came to the city to continue negotiating with the insurance company. His friend's father had connections. After entering the city, he stayed in a gang area, always accompanied by 2 crew members. He chose to negotiate with the insurance company during the day and in safe places, didn't drink alcohol, and didn't go out at night. But even so, one night 2 weeks later, the father of my friend's friend met with an accident. It was the second day after a storm from the narrow sea landed in the port of Pentos. 2 days and nights of torrential rain caused floodwaters to surge into the city. The low-lying port area suffered severe damage, with many warehouses and houses collapsing under the attack of the wind and water, resulting in countless deaths and injuries among the populace. Needless to say, the father of my friend's friend also died in this disaster. According to surviving crew members, the experienced old captain was unfortunately pinned by a collapsing building during the disaster, unable to free himself, and was ultimately drowned by the floodwaters that had poured into the city. This was an accident, everyone said so. My friend's friend was now the heir to the insurance contract. The insurance company still informed my friend's friend to go through the procedures, but he didn't dare to go, because the previous accident made him suspect the insurance company. This was the story my friend heard. Upon hearing this bizarre account, although his friend was emphatic, my friend didn't fully believe it. My friend arranged for his friend to be placed in a safe place, sent people to investigate the matter, and personally came forward to negotiate with the insurance company on his behalf. As my friend had predicted, the reputable insurance company hadn't engaged in any underhanded dealings and had been fulfilling its contracts according to procedure. Furthermore, no signs of murder had been found in the deaths of his friend's 3 elders. His friend's actions seemed like a farce. Weeks passed, and everything remained normal, or so my friend began to think. But soon, an unexpected incident occurred. One day, a servant rushed in to inform my friend that the friend he'd been hiding in his secret courtyard had unexpectedly died. He took the maid who was caring for him swimming in the sea, insisting he could breathe underwater, the servants told my friend. His foot got caught in seaweed, and by the time the maid called us to pull him out, he was already dead, his belly full of seawater. This news caught my friend off guard. Hearing about it was one thing, but having it happen in his immediate circle was another. One after another, his friend's family had died by accidental drowning. Being well-traveled, he couldn't help but think of the bizarre stories he'd heard during his youth. So he immediately set off for the temple of the Red God, to report the matter to the priests who served the deity. Upon hearing the news, the temple quickly dispatched a Red Priest to investigate. The Red Priest immediately determined that something was amiss upon seeing the body. He sternly ordered my friend to purify the corpse with fire, including the previous 3 deceased individuals, all of whom were to be cremated. "It's a curse," the Red Priest declared, then commanded that all the dead person's belongings be brought to him for examination. Only then did my friend realize that his friends had been carrying a bag of gifts to bribe and smooth things over, and this bag had been passed around between the 4 deceased. The Red Priest eventually found a pearl necklace among the belongings, with an ink-like stain on the largest pearl. "This pearl is stained with tainted blood," said the Red Priest. "Everyone who has touched this pearl must come with me to be saved." Even my well-traveled friend had never experienced anything like this before. He sent the maidservants and the caretakers to the temple, and the matter was finally settled. Having witnessed such a bizarre event, my friend couldn't help but ask the Red Priest, "Are curses real?" The answer was, "Of course." He asked again, "Since there are such insidious curses in the world, how should we deal with them?" The Red Priest told him, "Believe in the Lord of Light. Come to the temple, where the flames will purify all, and you will be protected. The long night is dark, and dangers abound." From then on, every night, when the Red Priests ignited the flames in the temple and chanted their prayers, my friend would join them, offering prayers to the Red God, beseeching our healer to grant them dawn. Viserys chuckled at the coincidence as he read this, just as the chanting prayers of the Red priests lighting the night fires outside the high walls reached him. Daenerys asked, puzzled, what is it? A rather clumsy sermon story, isn't it? Viserys replied. It was immediately apparent from the storybook in his hand that it originated from the Red God's temple. It had been specifically compiled for preaching purposes, containing many short stories. The parables varied widely, but they were essentially of a few types, showcasing the benefits. The protagonist gained wealth and avoided disaster because of their faith in the Lord of Light, showcasing intimidation. The protagonist suffered misfortune because they did not believe the Red God's instructions, and then there were the bizarre stories, which were the ones Viserys was most interested in. These stories had poor narrative quality, and the solutions were often deus ex machina, but because they were recorded in the preaching storybooks, Viserys paid them extra attention. The non-narrative content described in these stories was very detailed and realistic, including how believers of the Red God worshipped, how they made offerings, the rituals for entering the temple, the way the priests worshipped, and even the time and manner in which temple prostitutes offered alms to believers. From this, it could be seen that these bizarre stories might not be just stories, but ways to educate believers on how to deal with such strange events. What's next? Daenerys asked. Although she wasn't interested in the story, she was still cooperative in asking her brother. Over these days, she had to adapt to this new way of getting along. Viserys had been particularly relaxed these days, as if he would no longer get angry about anything, and acted like he was going to stay here for a long time. He was unhurried and enjoyed sharing the novel stories he had found with her. It was difficult for Daenerys to discern her brother Viserys' true feelings from his words, and even when he did show emotion, she wasn't sure if it was genuine. She had a feeling that Viserys was secretly interested in the story, even though he downplayed it. But she wasn't certain. That's it, Viserys said, let's take a break. My mouth is dry from talking. They were in Illyrio's courtyard garden, in a gazebo overlooking the golden, shimmering view of the narrow sea at dusk. Desserts and drinks were laid out on the table, and the cool, gentle sea breeze caressed Viserys' face, making him feel relaxed and content. Daenerys quietly glanced up at her brother, who was standing in the wind with a relaxed expression, and silently closed her mouth. More than half a month had passed. With good food, drink, and diligent exercise every day at Illyrio's, Viserys' physique had visibly filled out, no longer resembling his previous gaunt appearance. The natural firmness and confidence in his expression made him look radiant, a stark contrast to the brother Daenerys remembered. Only Daenerys remained thin and burdened with worries. She couldn't understand what had happened to her brother, nor could she comprehend his composure in Illyrio's courtyard. Since Daenerys's legs had healed, her brother took her everywhere with him every day, talking to her and telling her new stories. His attitude towards her had become increasingly better. But the closer she got to her brother, the less she could understand his calmness and changes. Daenerys had tried to ask several times, but Viserys' answers were vague, always changing the subject. She gradually came to clearly feel the perfunctory attitude beneath her brother's superficial closeness, which made her uneasy. Lost in thought, Daenerys couldn't help but glance up at her brother Viserys, who was gazing at the narrow sea in the gentle sea breeze with a relaxed posture. Then, she followed his gaze towards the ocean in the twilight. Chapter 20, Illyrio's Return. In the past 20-odd days, they haven't mentioned leaving the courtyard, not even once. Illyrio, his portly frame settled in the master seat of the study, finally posed the question after listening to the reports from his steward and Annie. Yes, master, the steward replied earnestly. You used the word pattern just now when describing your observations. Explain what you mean by that, Illyrio inquired. Certainly. He sleeps in bed until noon each day. Before his sister fully recovers, after lunch, he would casually grab a book from the cabinet in the living room. First, he would go to his sister's room to tell her a story. Usually, he would leave after finishing one story. Then, he would walk around the courtyard with the book, circling it until sunset. After his sister's legs healed, he would take her with him to stroll in the courtyard after lunch, still reading while walking, occasionally commenting on the garden scenery. Sometimes he would tell his sister the stories from the book, and sometimes he would let her read it herself. After dinner, he would shut himself in his room to practice swordsmanship, often for several hours. This routine continues daily, without fail. Illyrio pondered, then asked, what do you think he's doing all this for? I don't know about the rest, but based on his actions, reading is just a cover for his training. He is training himself, and he is very effective, the steward replied. His behavior can be considered arduous training, like a soldier. He seems to be strolling in the courtyard during the day, but in reality, he is constantly walking, rarely sitting to rest, even wearing out a pair of new shoes. At night, he practices swordsmanship diligently. He has almost become a different person in these past few days. He has gained weight, his steps are steady, and his back is straight. He looks even more like a noble than when he first arrived. Illyrio said instinctively, you mean he's quietly training himself to be a king? That's right, the steward replied, head bowed. That's what I believe. Illyrio was silent for a moment, then turned to Annie, who was standing guard nearby. What do you think? I have the same feeling, Annie replied. He's almost unrecognizable from when he first arrived. If I were to meet him for the first time now, and the master told me he was a noble, I wouldn't doubt it. Illyrio's expression didn't change, but he asked in a low voice, besides that, what other observations have you made? The steward answered, he burned his dragon bone necklace with fire one night, turning the silver chain black, but he still keeps it tied to his hand. Other than that, there's nothing more to say. That's all from Viserys' side. Illyrio was silent for a moment after hearing this, as if digesting the information. After a while, he asked, and the girl? Annie replied, that girl is very tight-lipped. She relies heavily on her brother, and sticks close to him every day. She's timid, suspicious, and has no personality of her own, letting him control her. She's wary of me. She doesn't ask me for information, nor does she answer my casual questions. She responds to all my kindness with silence, and though she shows interest in what I say, she never asks questions. Sometimes she follows behind Viserys, and when Viserys tells her not to speak, she doesn't utter a single word all day. Illyrio said, Viserys is wary of us. He doesn't fully trust me, and of course, he wouldn't trust you. But it's not like we haven't noticed anything, Annie said. That girl isn't afraid of heat. Once, the bathwater was fresh from the kitchen, boiling hot. The girl didn't wait for the old woman to add cold water, she just got right in. The water was scalding, but she didn't make a sound or show any discomfort. I secretly had Viserys try the hot water a few times to see if he'd react the same way, but he always insisted on having it cooled down. Illyrio's expression shifted at the news. He looked thoughtful, but no one knew what he was thinking. Finally, he simply said vaguely, perhaps there is something special about the Targaryens. Governor Illyrio, you're finally back. Viserys' joyous voice echoed from the dining room door before he even appeared. The tone suggested he had been waiting for Illyrio for a long time, which left Illyrio momentarily speechless, causing him to abandon his prepared opening remarks. Illyrio looked up and saw Viserys enter the dining room first, followed by the butler he had sent to guide him, and then Daenerys. Viserys had an eager smile on his face. He strode forward, trying to maintain an air of authority while struggling to contain his excitement. He quickly approached Illyrio, and with an effort to restrain his excitement, he laughed and said, Governor Illyrio, what did your trip to Westeros yield? Tell me everything. At this point, Illyrio finally understood what the steward and Annie meant when they said Viserys had changed. Recalling his first meeting with the king, Illyrio thought he truly deserved the title Beggar King. He was dressed in filthy, tattered finery, with a gloomy expression, a sallow and gaunt face, a thin, tall frame, and a somewhat hunched posture. His unkempt hair was a mess, and he seemed a little neurotic. When speaking to others, his hands were restless and trembled slightly, yet he tried hard to control it. When excited, his voice would become high-pitched, and his pale, violet eyes held a look of fanaticism. But now, after only 20-odd days, the king's appearance had changed drastically. His pale face now had color, his features were clean, and the hollows of his cheeks were visibly filling out. His long hair was combed to a shine like molten silver. Although still thin, his upright posture could now fill out his clothes. Illyrio had no doubt that, with his healthy and handsome appearance, Viserys could attract many young ladies at a noble banquet. The only things that hadn't changed much were the excitement and fanaticism in his purple eyes, hinting at the madness hidden beneath the surface. He is indeed training himself to be a king, at least physically. Illyrio had made many calculations before returning. He guessed that the king's collaboration with the Dornish people would be nothing more than a marriage alliance. Princess Arianne Martell of Dorne was still unmarried. Prince Doran always presented her with elderly suitors when considering marriage, and there were also suitable candidates who sought to marry the princess, but Prince Doran had turned them all down. Now, he realized that the Dornish people had already betrothed the princess to Viserys, waiting for him to return to Westeros and help him reclaim the Iron Throne. Seeing Viserys now, Illyrio was even more convinced that the Dornish and Viserys had communicated secretly where Varys couldn't see, even though Varys was still ambiguous about the matter. They had searched through the little bird's reports from recent years, but still didn't know when the two sides had secretly colluded. But Viserys was now in Illyrio's hands, and he had to quickly probe the king's true plans to plan the next steps. With this in mind, Illyrio bowed slightly. "Your Grace, please be seated first." What Illyrio didn't know was that Viserys, even before hearing Illyrio's usual "Your Grace," was filled with excitement. Inside, however, he was feeling rather guilty. He'd been so busy putting on a happy face when he woke up that morning and heard his butler say, "The master is waiting in the dining room," that he hadn't even listened to what the butler said afterward. Chapter 21, Testing the Waters. There's an Arabic proverb, "We shouldn't get angry easily, because when we're angry, we show our true abilities. And then, others will know how bad you are." This saying, reframed as "don't show your hand," actually suited Viserys very well. Viserys was, in fact, very afraid of a direct confrontation with Illyrio. He knew he simply didn't have the capital to reveal his hand in such a situation. In their relationship, Illyrio was the one who actually had the power to decide how the game was played. So, when Viserys realized that Illyrio hadn't uncovered his true background through Varys, he knew his strategy of creating a smokescreen had worked. His actions might have already, in Illyrio's eyes, been backed by a certain power. This meant that the conspiracy and intrigue of not showing their hand was still the game Illyrio was willing to play. This form was excellent for Viserys. They could sit down and talk things over, and would be unlikely to resort to violence easily. However, Viserys couldn't afford to be careless. Illyrio had been an assassin in his youth. He likely didn't take killing too seriously. Viserys just hoped that Illyrio's ambition was strong enough to keep him patient. "In fact, Your Grace, I went to Westeros and happened to witness the Seven Kingdoms holding a jesting tournament for Prince Joffrey's name day," Illyrio began to respond to Viserys. "I stayed in the harbour of King's Landing for several days. I watched with my own eyes as over 100 tents were set up on the riverbank outside the city walls of King's Landing. Every day, I saw knights and free riders from all over Westeros arriving. Tens of thousands of commoners came to watch. Even for someone as well-travelled as I am, it was a rare spectacle. Countless ships and horses entered the city every day. They came from all 7 kingdoms, the Crownlands, the Stormlands and the Reach, the Westerlands and the Vale, the Riverlands and the North, and even the Iron Islands and Dorne. He paused, looked at Viserys, and seeing no change in his expression, continued, "Countless noble knights, the heroes celebrated in hundreds of songs, were there. The knights wore enameled armor, brought horses and servants, and their cloaks were embroidered with different family crests. Unfortunately, I know very little about the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms. I could barely recognize the crowned stag of the Baratheons, the roaring lion of the Lannisters, the silver trout of the Tullus, the white moon and blue falcon of the Arryns, the dire wolf of the Starks." Before Illyrio could finish describing the other great noble houses, he didn't even have a chance to save the Sun Spear of Dorne for last as a test. Viserys rudely cut him off. "The dire wolf, you mean the Starks of the North are also there? Are you sure?" Viserys' interruption made Illyrio vaguely aware of some unusual emotional fluctuations, but he couldn't figure out why. He asked, "Is there a problem?" Viserys mumbled, "I heard the North is a long journey, and the Northerners have never been involved in the affairs of the South. I didn't expect the Starks to send someone all the way south to King's Landing to participate in Joffrey's name day tournament." "Did you inquire who represented the Stark family?" Illyrio asked. "Your Grace seems very interested in the Stark family." "Just curious," Viserys said. "To be clear, Governor, I am not questioning your words, but as far as I know perhaps it's just hearsay, and the information may not be accurate. The eldest son of the Stark family in the north is still young. If they were to come south, it would probably be the Duke of Winterfell himself. So he suspects I'm lying, so he's ignoring my probing?" Illyrio suddenly realized, but this wasn't his fault. "Your Grace, I did see ships with the dire wolf sigil of the Stark family entering the harbour in King's Landing." "Oh," Viserys changed the subject, "I suppose the North sent gifts for the Crown Prince's name day. After all, no matter how isolated, they still have to show respect to the royal court. The sea route from White Harbour in the north to King's Landing is convenient." "Go on, Governor Illyrio, what else did you see?" Viserys wasn't really suspicious of Illyrio. He just couldn't help but pay attention to news about the Stark family. Their situation was closely related to Viserys' speculation about the political situation in Westeros. The appearance of the Stark banner at the Crown Prince's tournament, which wasn't mentioned much in the original story, and which was believed to have happened before Robert went north, made him think. "Where were we?" Illyrio asked, seeing Viserys had offered a way out. He assumed Viserys was already on guard, so he didn't dare bring up the topic of the Dornish knights he'd seen in King's Landing to probe Viserys' attitude. He continued, "Oh yes, the dire wolf of the Starks. And the golden rose of the Tyrells, the golden kraken of the Iron Islands, the spear of Dorne." Seeing Illyrio listing the great houses of the Seven Kingdoms without getting to the point, Viserys couldn't help but ask again, "My dear Governor, didn't you go to King's Landing to inquire about the political situation? Why are you only talking about the Crown Prince's tournament?" Viserys knew what Illyrio was probing at. He was subtly hinting at the immense power the Seven Kingdoms possessed now, like a pot of boiling oil, and the attitude of the great lords towards the royal court. He didn't want Illyrio to steer the conversation towards a specific territory or the topic of raising an army. Illyrio, interrupted for the second time, showed no sign of displeasure. Instead, he asked with a gentle smile, "What would your Grace like to hear?" "The political situation in King's Landing, of course," Viserys replied matter-of-factly. Wasn't Illyrio talking about the Crown Prince's tournament precisely to talk about the political situation? Viserys understood this, of course, but sometimes he needed to ask some silly, pointless questions to deflect the increasingly blatant probing in the other man's words. The political situation. Of course, Illyrio was momentarily thrown off by the broad topic of political situation. Fortunately, he was prepared. He glanced around, using his eyes to dismiss the steward in the dining hall, and then looked at Daenerys, as if confirming there were no others present, before continuing, "Pardon my merchant background, Your Grace, my understanding of politics is somewhat lacking. I must be frank, this trip, I may not be able to verify your claims. My trip happened to coincide with the grand tournament of the Crown Prince's name day, and I saw the support of the great lords of the Seven Kingdoms for the royal family. I also saw the countless people in King's Landing who love the king. Forgive me for using the word love, Your Grace, if I have offended you, then I apologize to you. But that is what I saw. King Robert's reputation is very high in King's Landing, and his two brothers also love him and are devoted to him. That's what the people say. Oh, really, is that what you think, Governor? Viserys wore a mysterious smile. If that's the case, why are you still willing to support me? Frankly, Viserys had thought that by trying to change the subject, he would be met with increasingly aggressive probing from Illyrio, but he hadn't expected it to be so forceful. Because I'm not certain, Your Grace, Illyrio said. I've also been told that during the War of the Usurper, the noble lords and houses all rose up to serve the king. The Greyjoys and other houses defied the royal court, and the Dornish in the south are filled with rage, wanting to avenge Princess Elia and her children. In the Seven Kingdoms, there are not a few who secretly sew the dragon banner, waiting for the day you lead your army across the sea. Illyrio's words this time were particularly sincere, as if from the heart, and extremely seductive. Daenerys, who had been listening quietly with her head bowed, couldn't help but look up and glance at the fat governor. Daenerys had no subordinates and didn't know what people on the other side of the narrow sea were thinking or doing, but she instinctively didn't trust Illyrio, nor did she believe his sweet talk. But she couldn't help but worry about her brother, Viserys, and lowered her head again. Viserys' face was showing a look of smugness, with a slight smile on his lips. He was in high spirits, as if because of Illyrio's attitude, he had spoken without thinking. They say cough, cough, he said, immediately trying to cover something up with a strange cough, then quickly recovered his high spirits, as if nothing had happened, and continued, I mean, there are rumors that the Tyrells of Highgarden and Duke Renly of Storm's End are very close. Hasn't Governor Illyrio heard a little wind, seen a little sign, in Westeros? Illyrio had posed a choice, and his words showed that he was more inclined to Viserys. Viserys vaguely felt that as long as he answered appropriately and gave a seemingly insightful analysis, Illyrio would take advantage of the situation and immediately change his attitude, then give him more resources, and even possibly adopt a posture of allegiance. This was Illyrio probing his attitude. Viserys knew, Illyrio was doing this to quickly find out his bottom line. Viserys was very clear that he couldn't accept Illyrio's false offer of allegiance, because he had nothing at all. Being too close to Illyrio or too distant from him wasn't a good thing right now. After much thought, Viserys decided to choose playing dumb from his many prepared strategies. This didn't fit the persona he had originally intended to portray, but it fit the persona of the body itself. Ambitious but impatient, confident but ignorant, with some means but impractical. He decided to act like a boastful, political novice with a set of hearsay theories, but knew nothing about practical matters. Viserys then threw out a new lure, changing the subject. Illyrio pretended not to notice Viserys' exaggerated attempt to cover up his slip of the tongue, adopting a posture of attentive listening. Your Grace, what kind of rumors, what kind of signs? Illyrio had already prepared himself, curious to see what kind of words Viserys would use, similar to what he had said when they observed the Dothraki together. However, Viserys' reaction was strange. He maintained an excited expression and asked, as if it were only natural, shouldn't you be the one telling me? Your Grace. Illyrio was momentarily confused, looking at Viserys with a puzzled expression. The excitement on Viserys' face gradually faded, and an expression of surprise gradually became apparent. He seemed to be scrambling to cover up. There must be some signs, right? Illyrio was very familiar with this expression and these words. It was the ignorant expression of those who talked big but couldn't answer specific, practical questions. It meant that Viserys had no understanding of the actual situation, had only heard this saying from others, and thus believed it, using it to try to persuade Illyrio. Viserys' expression was as exaggerated as ever, making it difficult for Illyrio to discern its truth. Illyrio asked seriously, "Rumors, you said just now. Didn't the rumors you heard specify what they were like, Your Grace?" Viserys struggled to cover up. "The Tyrells of Highgarden and Duke Renly of Storm's End are getting close, the rumors say so. Isn't that an obvious, well-known fact?" Illyrio struggled to control his expression, asking seriously, "So, this obvious, well-known fact, as you say, how should I verify it? There must be some sign." Viserys forced a smile. "Didn't you hear anything in King's Landing, Governor?" Hearing this, even Daenerys couldn't help but glance up at Viserys in surprise. The embarrassment on his face was truly exquisite, it even gave Daenerys goosebumps. Illyrio hadn't expected things to develop like this, to the point where he momentarily doubted whether he had misjudged Viserys. Could it be that Viserys wasn't so clever, and was indeed just a boastful fool with no understanding of concrete matters? Illyrio hesitated, considered for a moment, and finally gave Viserys a way out. "Speaking of which, I heard that Renly and the Knight of Flowers are very close, and have a good relationship. Does that count as a sign?" Viserys immediately seized the opportunity. "Of course, Renly and the Knight of Flowers, of course. But even so, the Knight of Flowers is not the heir to Highgarden," Illyrio continued to ask. "I'm afraid that is not enough to prove the fact you mentioned, is it?" "What, the heir to Highgarden? Oh, the Knight of Flowers is from House Tyrell of Highgarden." Viserys muttered softly, trying to maintain a smile. Illyrio naturally heard his mutterings and couldn't help but feel speechless. He doesn't even know who the Knight of Flowers is? But soon, under Illyrio's gaze, Viserys swallowed hard, his face gradually taking on a determined expression. He said, "No, Your Excellency, that's not necessarily the case. You know, Eddard Stark of the North wasn't the heir to Winterfell, but he was close to King Robert the Usurper, and they usurped the Iron Throne together." Illyrio had to admit that even though Viserys was flamboyant and affected, the attitude he displayed was truly one of someone with certain skills. At the very least, his ability to change his expression and be shameless was truly top-notch. Thinking back, Viserys used the story of the Gardner family of Highgarden to try and win over Illyrio, and he had the same determined look then. Was his certainty true or false? Without giving Illyrio time to continue dwelling on the so-called facts, Viserys quickly moved on from the topic. He clasped his hands together slightly, subconsciously using the small gesture to rub the dragon bone pendant wrapped around his right hand, and asked Illyrio, "Ahem, Your Excellency, I remember I asked you about dragon bones and dragon eggs before you left." Illyrio's face was expressionless as he looked at Viserys seriously. Viserys looked at Illyrio with a slightly nervous expression. "I remember you're a dragon bone merchant. Dragon eggs are rare in the world, and I'm afraid they won't be easy to obtain. But I think dragon bones must be simple for you. Could I trouble you to lend me some? There must be quite a few in your warehouse, and I have a use for them." Hearing Viserys suddenly change the subject and make concessions on his previous demands, yet still request dragon bones, Illyrio couldn't help but be intrigued. "May I be so bold as to ask what you intend to use these dragon bones for?" "I'm sorry, Governor, but I cannot tell you that. However, rest assured, I will repay you in the future." Viserys fixed his gaze on Illyrio, as if to gauge his reaction. Seeing no change in Illyrio's expression, Viserys composed himself and said, "A king keeps his word." This promise offered no guarantee, and the previous probing questions regarding Viserys' answers were frankly terrible, yet Viserys was still brazenly demanding the dragon bones. Illyrio fell silent. The silence in the dining room was such that a pin could have been heard dropping for several breaths. Finally, Illyrio asked, "How many do you require?" "You agree, Governor?" Viserys visibly relaxed. Then, without answering Illyrio's question, he quickly took off the dragon bone pendant from his hand. "Actually, there's something else I need you to do. He placed the black and silver chained dragon bone pendant on the table in front of Illyrio. I want you to sell this pendant in your shop, in a prominent location. The price should be 19 gold and 8 silver, plus 14 copper coins, in Pentos currency. Illyrio, without changing his expression, responded in a normal tone, this pendant is overpriced, it's unlikely to sell. If you urgently need money, I can. No, Viserys interrupted again. Chapter 22, Gifts. Viserys hoped that Illyrio would be more drawn to the they he spoke of, giving him more time. Viserys knew that his planning could hardly be called a clever scheme, and his execution was somewhat clumsy and rough. But his goal from beginning to end was Illyrio's dragonbone resources. This goal was clear and straightforward, he even repeatedly asked Illyrio directly. Yet, the more direct he was, the more Viserys thought it seemed in Illyrio's eyes that it was merely a cover-up or preparation for other purposes, especially since he had laid so many false trails, which should have some effect. In fact, in a certain sense, Viserys' foolish behavior and pretense of being a fool was not without an attempt to probe Illyrio's tolerance. And the facts proved that this governor was deeply cunning and would not easily act on impulse. After the meal, Illyrio cleared his throat and said in a solemn tone, Your Majesty, in fact, I have always kept your needs in mind. It's just that I was in a hurry at the time and didn't ask you for details. After he finished speaking, he clapped his hands on the seat, and soon a butler came in with 2 exquisite gift boxes. He gestured for the butler to place the gift boxes in front of Viserys and signaled him to open them. Viserys opened the boxes, revealing 2 sets of exquisite jewelry. Each box contained a dragonbone hairpin, 2 dragonbone pins, and cuff links, brooches, and other small dragonbone ornaments that could be used to adorn clothing. These are 2 sets of dragonbone ornaments, Your Majesty. They are a small token of my regard, presented to you and her grace Daenerys, Illyrio said. However, I suppose this is not what your majesty truly needs, so please tell me exactly what kind of dragonbone you need? And how much? Thank you for your generosity, Viserys accepted graciously. Then, his spirits lifted, and he asked, seeking advice, what styles of dragonbone are there, generally? Allow me to enlighten you. Dragonbone comes in raw materials, luxury goods, items crafted into blades and bows, and purely decorative pieces, Illyrio elaborated. Does your grace have any specific needs? Illyrio transformed the broad concept into concrete items. Viserys pondered for a moment, trying to discern any hidden meaning behind Illyrio's question, but ultimately came up empty. Viserys looked at Illyrio and replied hopefully, I see. Then, let's have a bit of everything. I'd like 20 pieces to start, 5 of each style. Is that a problem? Illyrio agreed, it would be my pleasure to assist you, your grace. Viserys had thought 20 pieces would be a large request, after all, the fat governor's dragonbone collection he'd seen upon arrival had only shown 9 pieces. Now that Illyrio had readily agreed, it left him with no opportunity to use the prepared speech. In any case, it was better to have less trouble. It was best that Illyrio had agreed so easily. Viserys nodded in satisfaction and said very seriously, I will remember what you have done for me, Governor Illyrio. These words truly came from the bottom of his heart. But Illyrio clearly didn't take it seriously. It is my duty. Regarding the situation in Westeros earlier, Governor Illyrio, Viserys began, now that the matter was settled, trying to salvage his earlier poor response. I will give you a convincing answer. Illyrio seemed unconcerned by his previous behavior, replying with a friendly smile, I eagerly await it. What exactly is going on? When the conversation at the table ended, and her brother and the fat governor seemed to have gotten what they wanted, Daenerys felt utterly confused. She was walking back to her room. Viserys walked ahead of her, holding the 2 gift boxes the fat governor had given him. His steps seemed light, and there was no sign of his usual dark mood on his face, but he didn't say a word. Daenerys felt that he was not as he appeared. She had a vague sense of unease, but since Viserys wasn't speaking, she didn't dare ask. They walked in silence until they reached Daenerys's room. Viserys closed the door as usual and sat on the tea table by the window, looking out at the sea. Under Daenerys's gaze, Viserys first poured himself a glass of lemonade and drank it all, then opened the gift boxes. He wore a satisfied expression and smiled at Daenerys. "One box is for you, it's really beautiful. Come and sit down and have a look. I'll help you try it on to see if it fits." Daenerys sat down on the chair beside his seat and looked at the exquisite gift box her brother had opened. "This is for me." "Of course." Viserys ran his fingers over the dragon bone ornaments in the box, as if carefully selecting one. He finally chose a hairpin from the second box. "Try it on." Daenerys reached out and took it. The hairpin was black, small, and delicate, with a warmth like it had been warmed by the sun. Viserys was smiling, looking at her with anticipation, as if waiting for her to put on the hairpin. Daenerys didn't speak. Governor Illyrio was a merchant, specializing in the trade of spices, gems, and dragon bone. He had a wide network of connections, not only throughout the 9 free cities, but also as far east as Ves Dothrak and the legendary lands along the Jade Sea. He was knowledgeable and rich. The maid Annie would sometimes ramble about these things when they were alone. He also had slaves, the flower farmers, dog keepers, and kitchen maids with copper collars in the courtyard were all his slaves. There was a ban on the slave trade in Pentos, but it didn't apply to powerful figures. Daenerys couldn't imagine such a powerful person being so humble in front of them. In fact, she could sense that Viserys himself was equally wary of the merchant governor, but she couldn't understand Viserys' behavior. Daenerys was full of doubts. But she still fell silent and started to fix her hair. She combed her hair and then secured it with the dragon bone hairpin. When she was done, she asked, "How is it?" Viserys looked her up and down with an evaluative gaze. He stared at her hair for a while, and then gazed at her face, as if trying to see something in her expression. Daenerys waited in silence for 10 breaths before Viserys finally spoke, "Not bad." For some reason, Daenerys felt that Viserys seemed to have other expectations of her. Over these days, she had become a little bolder when talking to her brother, so she followed up, "What is it?" Viserys seemed to think of something. He picked up a dragon bone brooch from the box and personally pinned it to her clothes. He also casually smoothed a strand of hair from her forehead and adjusted the hairpin on her head. "This is more stylish." Viserys moved quietly, and after finishing, he sat back down to stare at her, which made Daenerys feel puzzled and sit up straight. After a while, Viserys said to her, "Come, help me pin up my hair too." Hearing Viserys order her, Daenerys got up as instructed. As Daenerys was fixing Viserys' hair, she saw a faint smile on his face, his gaze resolutely fixed forward. During the time she'd spent with her brother, Daenerys easily recognized that this expression was fake, meaning that if she asked him a question next, she would only get perfunctory answers. So she kept silent, finished everything, and then sat back down quietly. "Finished?" Viserys asked. "Yes," Daenerys replied softly. Viserys paused, then got up and said, "Let's go for a walk." In Daenerys's room, they put on the dragon bone ornaments Illyrio had given them, one by one, and then began their after-dinner walk for the day. This was another change in Viserys that Daenerys couldn't understand. Illyrio's courtyard wasn't small, but it wasn't particularly large either. She'd only walked through it a few times and already memorized the entire layout. She could find her way around even with her eyes closed. Yet, Viserys seemed to relish it, going through the same routes every day, forwards and backwards, without any sign of boredom. And there were endless stories. But today seemed a little different. They walked in silence for a while, and Viserys didn't seem inclined to start a story. They followed the corridor into the garden, past the flower beds, through the evergreen grove, and finally reached the seaside pavilion. It was a corner overlooking the sea, where they could hear the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below. Only then did Viserys begin to speak. He stood by the pavilion, turned to look at Daenerys, his face serious, his voice soft, like the wind. Daenerys, if you sense anything unusual or dream of anything, remember it and find a chance to tell me quietly. Daenerys thought she'd misheard him. She looked up. Viserys was looking at her, his expression still serious, but his voice had grown louder, and he said with interest, "Do you know what comes to mind every time I look at the sea here?" Daenerys asked, surprised, "What?" Viserys patted her shoulder, as if encouraging her, as if comforting her. He said, "Dragonstone, that is our homeland." Viserys had already adopted a storytelling tone. About 400 years ago, when the freehold of Valyria still ruled the continent of Essos, our ancestors extended their influence to the narrow sea. They annexed an island that guarded the throat of Blackwater Bay and built a castle there, but they did not continue westward. The castle tower was magically shaped from rock by Valyrian magic, resembling a giant dragon, hence the island's name, Dragonstone. Before the doom, the daughter of the then leader of House Targaryen, Daenerys the Dreamer, dreamed that Valyria would be destroyed by fire. The family leader believed her dream, so he abandoned his family's holdings in the freehold and moved the entire family to Dragonstone. And it was with Dragonstone as their base that Aegon and his sister wives launched the conquest, uniting the 6 kingdoms. You were born there, Dany. Remember it, and don't forget. Chapter 23, Hints. A blackened dragon bone pendant, priced at 19 gold coins, 8 silver coins, and 14 copper coins in Pentos currency. What do you make of it? Illyrio summoned his butler and the maid, Annie, as they were the only two with any sense. Too expensive, Annie answered first. It sounds like some kind of code. Illyrio looked at her, but the maid lowered her eyes and fell silent. He then turned to the butler. The butler bowed his head in thought, then finally said, "Master, I don't know." It was obvious the price was a code, but the 3 of them couldn't make heads or tails of it, no matter how hard they tried. Their brainstorming didn't last long. Confirming that Viserys and his sister were indeed communicating with outside forces was more important than deciphering the riddle Viserys had thrown out. Governor Illyrio once again confirmed that Viserys hadn't left in the past 20 days, in these past 20-odd days, they haven't left the courtyard, nor have they mentioned wanting to leave. The information was off, but the fact that Viserys could be so patient was hard for Illyrio to believe. He was truly surprised that Viserys had quietly stayed in that small courtyard for over 20 days. The butler affirmed again, "Yes." This time, Illyrio also inquired about the outside. What about outside? Any anomalies or surveillance? This courtyard area was where the dignitaries and nobles of Pentos resided. Normally, except for the streets, there was no way to peek inside, but if any big shots nearby held a banquet, it was inevitable that there would be a lot of people coming and going. No, things have been relatively quiet in and around the courtyard for the past 20 days, the butler replied. Illyrio cautiously gave the order, "Send 2 more people outside to keep an eye on the streets. If there are any abnormalities or suspicious movements by strangers, notify me immediately." After leaving the seaside pavilion, Dany could no longer calm her heart. She wanted to ask countless times, but she didn't. Viserys choosing this method to talk to her must have its own considerations. She thought of the greed that flashed across the fat face of Illyrio when she first met him, the chatter and overtures from the maid Annie, and the exchanges between Viserys and Illyrio that she couldn't understand. What she couldn't shake from her mind the most was the change that had occurred in Viserys. He seemed like a different person, no longer easily angered, and full of confidence in everything. The baseless, unwavering sense of certainty that her brother possessed even made Dany secretly ponder its source. Now, that mysterious veil seemed to have lifted a corner for her. Dany's heart thumped. They continued to stroll along the cobblestone path of Illyrio's courtyard. Viserys led the way, and Dany followed silently, step by step. As time passed, Dany suddenly felt a different kind of thought in her heart. Once, she had been uneasy because of Viserys' increasingly perfunctory attitude after the change, but now, when he seemed to reveal his true intentions towards her, Dany became worried. She was unprepared for Viserys' expectations. Just pretend I didn't hear it, she suddenly thought. His voice is so soft, and the sound of the waves is so loud. When he asks, I'll just say I didn't hear him. Wait, isn't it just asking me to remember some unusual feelings and dreams? What's there to worry about? She gradually realized she was overthinking things. Viserys was clearly just asking her to do a small thing, even though he acted as if it was serious, as if the situation was dire. But considering his exaggerated expressions these days, what was there to worry about with such a small thing? But what feelings are unusual? What dreams are unusual? I can't say. Will he hit me and scold me? She suddenly thought of the past again. Viserys, when angry, would have a ferocious expression, viciously digging his fingernails into her skin and saying, "You have awakened the wrath of the sleeping dragon." Some unpleasant memories surfaced, and Dany's steps, following her brother, inevitably slowed. What's wrong? Dany saw Viserys turn his head, a mocking smile on his face, a strange color flickering in his purple eyes. But seeing Viserys' face, she was inexplicably no longer afraid. Nothing, she replied to Viserys. If you're tired, go back and rest, Viserys smiled at her. I'm not tired, she replied. We are family. Dany told herself. Viserys was her only family, and she didn't want to be hit or scolded, nor did she want to be looked down upon and treated perfunctorily. Dany thought as she saw Viserys nod at her. He didn't say anything else, just turned and continued walking. Dany's heart gradually calmed. Suddenly, she realized something. Viserys needs her help. Viserys had always been wary of Illyrio and everyone in the courtyard, so he would whisper to her over the sound of the waves. That was what he truly wanted to express. Thinking this way, Dany realized she'd always known. The slave gardener wearing a collar in the garden, the guards with swords at the main gate, the dogs in the kennels at the back door, the sweet-talking Illyrio, the always serious butler, and even the enthusiastic maid Annie were all people the siblings needed to be wary of. Once she understood this, many of Viserys' exaggerated behaviors made sense. Dany, after figuring it out, suddenly found that all her chaotic emotions had vanished. She was surprised. Why had she only realized this now? Dany looked up at Viserys' back, suddenly feeling that her brother's figure was a little lonely. She felt a surge of courage, took a step forward, and moved closer to him. She wanted to fight alongside him. Viserys, of course, had no idea what Dany was thinking. The reason he was dropping hints to her at this moment was naturally because the Dragonbone deal seemed to be coming together. He would inevitably have to interact with Dany, so he wanted to lay the groundwork and prepare her mentally. Also, coincidentally, he had sensed something resembling a dragon soul within one of the Dragonbone hairpins Illyrio had given him. Viserys planned to run a small test on Dany, but he was worried that she might become uncontrollable again after coming into contact with the suspected dragon soul item, just like the last time. Therefore, he used affectionate hints in his words. He had thought Dany's change in mood just now was caused by the dragon soul again, but she quickly returned to normal. This left Viserys somewhat disappointed. He suspected that the amount of dragon soul contained in the Dragonbone hairpin might be incredibly low. Just as the two siblings were walking silently along the garden path, each with their own thoughts, they passed a rockery and saw the owner of the courtyard sitting on a resting bench ahead. It seemed this trip to the Seven Kingdoms had made the governor very eager. Chapter 24, Dreams. Daenerys's heart skipped a beat the moment she saw Illyrio. Viserys had just whispered to her in the seaside pavilion, and she couldn't help but connect the two, becoming nervous. But it was just Daenerys overthinking things. Viserys, on the other hand, was quite composed. He was the one who spoke first upon seeing Illyrio. "It's rare to encounter the governor in the garden. What brings you to admire the flowers and scenery?" In front of Illyrio was a rose garden, meticulously manicured and quite elegant. "Hee, Your Majesty, I'll be honest, I'm not interested in these flowers and plants. I just saw other courtyards with them, so I followed suit," Illyrio said jokingly. Viserys didn't know if Illyrio was trying to maintain his nouveau riche persona, but it didn't stop him from rambling. "There aren't many varieties as gorgeous and beautiful as these. The flowers are full, the shapes are noble, the colors are rich, and they are graceful and charming. Are these from Highgarden? I can't say for sure. To be honest, Your Majesty, these were left by the original owner when I bought the courtyard." Seeing Viserys looking like he wanted to chat about the rose garden, Illyrio quickly steered the conversation toward what he wanted to say. "Actually, I was waiting for you, Your Majesty." "Oh. There's a banquet," Illyrio said. "I wonder if Your Grace would be interested in attending." "A banquet?" Viserys' expression suddenly became tense. "Have I been invited? Has news of my arrival in Pentos spread? Has my location been exposed? Is this the usurper's plot?" Illyrio watched Viserys' eyes widen dramatically, his expression grave. He tried to guess how much of this performance was genuine and how much was for show. But his words, beyond his resistance, undoubtedly questioned his discretion. Illyrio quickly explained, No, Your Grace. I didn't make myself clear. The banquet doesn't invite you, it invites me. Let me explain. It's an auction banquet. Rumors say a dragon egg will appear at the banquet." "A dragon egg?" Viserys couldn't hide his shock. "Really? Rumors are just that, rumors. It's impossible to verify," Illyrio said uncertainly. Viserys thought to himself, "But?" "As expected," Illyrio said, "but I thought Your Grace might be interested, so I came to ask if you would like to attend." "Of course, I'm interested," Viserys replied. "But, Illyrio, the usurper has a high price on my head. He's tried and tried, I can assure you. The assassins he hires are always on my heels. I am the last true dragon descendant, and as long as I live, he won't rest easy. We are in the shadows now, so perhaps you don't feel it, but do you know the risks if I were to appear at a banquet and the usurper found out?" Viserys' expression was serious, and he spoke with great solemnity. Illyrio thought, "You've been attending banquets everywhere else. Why weren't you worried then?" He said, "Many dignitaries will be at the feast. The host will naturally protect his guests. Furthermore, at such auction banquets, guests can wear masks. You can wear a mask, and I will vouch for you. No one will know who you are. Illyrio, go yourself. If there are dragon eggs, it's best if you can get them. If not, it doesn't matter," Viserys replied resolutely. "Perhaps you think I'm being paranoid, but times have changed. I can no longer take risks." Viserys' rhetoric was always full of implications, attracting the attention of those with ulterior motives. "What's different now? Why can't you take risks anymore?" Having said that, Illyrio could only lower his head respectfully. "Your Grace, please forgive my lack of consideration." "It's not your fault, Illyrio," Viserys comforted him like a monarch comforting his subject. "You don't understand the danger of the usurper. I haven't stayed in one place for years, haven't settled down. Besides failing to find a steadfast supporter, it's to avoid the assassins. Now, finally, there's someone like you willing to help, and I remember I told you that what I need most right now is time. It's rare to have such a safe place now, and I don't want to give it up easily." Viserys' attitude was very sincere. Illyrio was forced to respond, "Your Majesty, I understand your wishes. Please forgive my abruptness." Illyrio came suddenly and left quickly, soon departing. Viserys' expression was as calm as ever, but he felt immense pressure inside. Facing Illyrio's relentless probing, even though he was prepared, he still couldn't handle it easily. Illyrio's actions could be considered aggressive, even willing to use something like dragon eggs as bait, showing a ruthless determination. Viserys naturally believed that Illyrio was setting him up. This guy didn't make his intentions clear. The news of the dragon eggs was probably just bait to attract Viserys. If he went to the so-called banquet, everything he encountered would be controlled by Illyrio. Viserys lacked information and had no idea what traps Illyrio would set for him at the banquet. At this time, Viserys had to control the pace as much as possible. Doing less meant making fewer mistakes. He adopted a posture and acted according to his own rhythm, which would make him appear confident and cause Illyrio to hesitate. He desperately hoped for some feedback from the tests on Daenerys. Daenerys didn't know what he was thinking at the moment. She was pondering the words he had spoken to Illyrio. Those familiar words made her momentarily associate him with his pre-trauma appearance. Thinking of how he always said the usurper's assassins were hot on his heels, yet Daenerys hadn't seen a single assassin in all these years, thinking of the true dragon he always mentioned and his insane craving for the throne across the sea. She couldn't tell if his words were true or false. Were the words he said to Illyrio all lies, and could the whispers he said to her be taken seriously? The courage she had finally mustered to stand by his side was quietly dissipating. Daenerys stared at him blankly, trying her best to keep up with his steps, wanting to maintain her courage. She tried to clear her mind of all the random thoughts and told herself again, "We are family." They walked around in the sun for several more rounds. Viserys, for some reason, kept going under the sun today, and Daenerys was dizzy from the midday heat. When Viserys suddenly suggested going back to rest, Daenerys couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. After lunch, she had walked a long way and been exposed to the harsh sun. Back in her room, sitting by the cool window, she closed her eyes and rested silently for a while. Daenerys grew drowsy and soon drifted off to sleep. Daenerys dreamed of Viserys. At first, in the dream, Viserys was hitting her, bullying her again. She was terrified and at a loss. She wanted to run away from him, but her body wouldn't obey. He struck her repeatedly, knocking her to the ground. She was covered in blood, moaning with her eyes closed. Suddenly, there was a thunderous roar like an explosion, followed by a terrifying flash of lightning. Opening her eyes, she saw that Viserys was no longer hitting her. He smiled at her first, then didn't look at her again, striding away into the distance. His face was full of confidence, his steps firm, without looking back, growing farther and farther away from her. She suddenly felt abandoned and desperately wanted to catch up to the departing figure. But her feet were heavy, unable to move even an inch. She looked down. There was another Viserys, his face contorted with a vicious expression, clawing at her bloodied legs, his nails digging into her skin, as if trying to drag her into a bottomless, dark abyss. She looked up in astonishment, but the Viserys who had departed was already gone. The horizon was a vast, endless dark curtain. That pitch-black darkness stood between heaven and earth, dominating everything in her field of vision. Her senses fell into a peculiar state at that moment, as if she were not herself. Unprecedented panic surged from the depths of her heart. "Leave, leave quickly!" She heard a voice calling out. Searching for the source, she realized it was her own throat that was moving. Then Daenerys woke up, shivering and drenched in cold sweat. The lingering echoes of the dream, urging her to leave, still seemed to resonate in her mind. "What is it? Did you have a nightmare?" At that moment, she heard Viserys' voice beside her. Daenerys was startled. Looking up, she saw Viserys sitting across from her in the tea seat by the window, observing her as if in judgment. Sunlight streamed from behind him, casting shadows over his face. The lingering echoes in Daenerys's mind gradually faded, as if they were a hallucination. Viserys' concerned greeting reached her ears. "Daenerys, you look terrible. Are you all right?" Hearing his concerned greeting, Daenerys's agitated heart quickly calmed, and the fear brought by the nightmare seemed to be peeled away. "It was a nightmare," she said. She quickly recalled Viserys' whispered words in the seaside pavilion earlier that day. "If you feel anything unusual or dream of anything, remember it, and tell me discreetly when you have the chance." Not long after he'd said those words, she'd had an unusual dream. A certain inquisitive curiosity and unease made Daenerys eager to get some answers. She didn't even know what the question was, but she needed an answer. Her voice lowered, and she spoke in a whisper. "I dreamt." But when the words reached her lips, Daenerys didn't know how to say them. She felt that the part of her dream about Viserys would definitely anger him. Would she awaken his sleeping dragon's fury? The sudden change in the past 20-odd days was too short compared to the years of fear that had shadowed her. Her courage could only carry her this far. Viserys saw Daenerys' hesitant expression, and calmly approached her. His hands naturally reached out to gently hold hers, a warm smile spread across his face, and he said to her as if to comfort her, "I guess you dreamed about me." Daenerys lowered her eyes nervously, unable to meet his gaze. "Did I hit you in your dream?" Viserys asked gently. He waited for a moment, and seeing that Daenerys didn't know how to answer, he followed up with a full of apology, "I'm sorry." Daenerys was at a loss. "That's all in the past." Viserys' grip on her hand tightened. "I promise you, Daenerys, that will never happen again. We are family, the only family we have in this world." Viserys guided Daenerys' hand slowly from the table to in front of him. He leaned closer, as if he wanted to press himself against Daenerys, and whispered softly in her ear, "I know you have countless questions, but believe me. Everything I do is for our brighter future." The warm breath that Viserys exhaled made Daenerys' ears turn red. She held her breath for a moment, having no idea what would happen next, nor was she prepared. The story of Aegon the Conqueror and his sister wives suddenly popped into her mind. Before she could figure out why she'd suddenly thought of these things, she felt a sudden sting, as if a mosquito had bitten her, from Viserys' tightly clasped hand. This broke Daenerys' train of thought. Soon, Daenerys realized Viserys was just gently embracing her as a comfort. He'd grabbed her hand and secretly pricked her fingertip with a pin, drawing a drop of blood. "Don't be afraid, Daenerys." Viserys' voice grew louder, his tone gentle, as if comforting her. "Don't be afraid." Daenerys' face was pressed against Viserys' chest. She couldn't see his expression, only feel one of his hands, which had been holding hers, move from her hand to her head, as if affectionately embracing her head. But Daenerys knew very well that Viserys was putting the blood he'd scraped from her finger into his mouth. Daenerys heard a thumping heartbeat, and for a moment, couldn't tell if it was her own or Viserys'. This embrace, which had another purpose, lasted for a while. Only after the heartbeat in her ear had completely calmed down, and after she was at a loss as to what she should do, did Viserys' voice come from above her head, "Are you feeling better?" They finished embracing, and Daenerys finally had space to look up at Viserys' face. She saw him looking at her with concern. "Much better." She couldn't say anything else. Until nightfall, Daenerys couldn't escape the confused thoughts of gain and loss, of uncertainty. She already knew that what Viserys said out loud was half true, and mostly not from the heart, but what he whispered to her, was that true? She didn't know, and didn't want to think about it. "We are family." Before bed, Daenerys said to herself again. "We are the only family we have in this world." When she didn't know when she fell asleep, the dream she had in the afternoon continued. Only this time, both Viserys were gone. She was alone in a void, with an endless dark curtain across the sky. At one moment, she felt herself in different positions simultaneously. Half of her was inside the dark curtain, purple dust pouring out of her body, swallowed by the ethereal, profound dark vortex, and finally, like specks of starlight, gradually dissipating in the dark curtain. The other half of her was outside the dark curtain, watching the specks of starlight like purple dust gradually dissipate in the dark abyss. As the purple dust was stripped away, the half within the dark curtain gradually became imperceptible, like an illusion. Her body felt faintly hot, and she lowered her head and saw sparks scattered on her. She felt that the places with sparks were radiating a hot breath, but it didn't make her feel any pain. Instead, there was a comfortable feeling, like washing her body with hot water. In a daze, she could feel the warm blood flowing through her skin. She felt this warmth, like a mother's embrace, though she never knew what that felt like. Chapter 25, Calculation and Planning. Viserys' controlled experiment was very simple, lacking repeated verification, but he considered it sufficient. Viserys was like a medieval alchemist, only needing to obtain reproducible results from simple experimental phenomena and put them into practice. The actual principles and logic could be set aside. Viserys' simple experimental conclusion was, to obtain the dragon soul on the dragon bone, Daenerys's blood was an indispensable medium. At noon, Viserys conducted a test without coming into contact with Daenerys's blood. The result was that Daenerys had a nightmare during her nap, while nothing happened to him. After coming into contact with Daenerys's blood, he had a similar dream again at night, dreaming that he had swallowed a small wisp of purple smoke, and then briefly perceived the magic power ocean within his body again, squeezing out a second drop of water. At this point, he obtained his second dragon scale, his second portion of magic power. The acquisition of the second portion of magic power meant that he had indeed found a reproducible method for collecting the dragon soul. Let items containing the dragon soul come into contact with Daenerys, then use Daenerys's blood as a medium, and achieve the goal of collecting the dragon soul in his dreams. Viserys was not sure if this was the only way to collect the dragon soul, but it was the only method he had at the moment. He wasn't in a hurry to test the power of his breath weapon in the bathroom. After so many days, he already knew that using up his magic power every day wouldn't make his magic pool bigger. After experimenting with the breath weapon, he knew that even doubling this tiny amount of magic power would only make the breath weapon go from a regular lighter to a slightly stronger one. This trick-like flame breath weapon, supported by this little bit of magic power, could only burn through silk and fine cloth. It wasn't enough to handle tougher materials like leather, or things like steak and pork chops, let alone armor. Viserys estimated that he would need at least 4 or 5 portions of dragon-scale magic power to make his condensed breath weapon last for 2 to 3 seconds, just to pierce leather and seriously injure a human body. To harm a knight in armor would require even more. If someone stood still and let him burn them, of course, it could cause burns, but in a fight, creating an opening to aim his mouth and only cause minor injuries was basically useless. It would be better to just use a dagger. Speaking of which, this second portion of magic power made Viserys realize a problem. The king of Guryoke was a dragon king with 3 magic attributes: fire, frost, and lightning. But the 2 portions of scale magic power he'd obtained were both fire attribute. Viserys wasn't sure if this was related to the dragon soul he had consumed, or if he just hadn't obtained enough magic power and was unlucky enough not to get frost and lightning magic power from the magic power ocean. These were all things that remained to be tested in the future before a conclusion could be made. Viserys sorted through the chaotic thoughts in his mind. With the dragon bone matter settled, Illyrio's covert surveillance became the primary issue. All signs indicated that Illyrio's surveillance of Viserys and Daenerys was a done deal, but after all these days, Viserys still hadn't been able to figure out his location. He had a rough guess, but hadn't found any evidence to verify it. He had observed the doors of the 2 rooms and the corridor outside with sufficient care, and these 2 locations could likely be ruled out. Considering his impression of the castle courtyard, coupled with the maids and the butler always lingering in the hallways, he suspected a very likely method of surveillance: the wall rats. Viserys speculated that somewhere within the walls of his and Daenerys's rooms, there might be a hidden compartment, and the observing rats were watching their every move from there. But Viserys found no evidence. He had examined the paintings, the oil lamp bases, and the glass decorations on the walls of his own room when the maids and butler were visible, and even secretly measured the thickness of the walls, observing possible hidden entrances, but he couldn't find any potential locations. Therefore, the next move would likely have to be made while considering the possibility of surveillance. Illyrio's probe. Illyrio was obviously pushing hard this time, with aggressive probes coming one after another. Viserys had to be extremely careful in dealing with them. Fight fire with fire was something anyone could say, but Viserys had to prepare enough rhetoric and planning, throwing out some deceptive baits, and he had to make the worst possible plans. If it came to the point of tearing off the mask and needing to show his true skills, he couldn't be idle. His trump card must be kept, left for Illyrio. Based on his contact and the impressions from the original novel, the only thing this old fox could use to threaten him might be his life. Daenerys. Thinking of this girl gave Viserys a bit of a headache. She was incredibly important to him now. But if it really came to a certain point, Viserys tried not to think about the worst-case scenario. Human nature was the thing most vulnerable to testing. If possible, he should avoid easily using extreme situations that would make his conscience uneasy to test himself. Thinking of this, Viserys thought that she might be running a fever at the moment. Last time, he had guessed that Daenerys's abnormal state the next day was because he had devoured the dragon's soul. Now, perhaps she was also in this situation. Viserys really wanted to go and verify his guess, to observe up close this abnormality on Daenerys from start to finish. But he had already established the habit of not getting up before noon in these 20-odd days. This was his effort to deal with Illyrio. Weighing the pros and cons, he couldn't let it go to waste. The riddle was solved faster than Illyrio had imagined. Only a day after Viserys' riddle was revealed, Illyrio knew the answer that seemed to be correct. Merciful Mother, descend your protection upon your sons, stop the stray arrows, withstand the swords, and let them see a beautiful tomorrow. Gentle Mother, help your daughters avoid suffering, quell their anger, tame their madness, and teach them to be tolerant of each other. This prayer came from the Seven-Pointed Star Bible, Gospel of the Mother, Chapter 19, Verse 8, the 14th subsection, and was incorporated into the Song of the Mother, a prayer praising the Mother in the Seven Gods faith. The Mother was one of the 7 different forms of a single deity in the Seven Gods faith. The followers of the 7 believed that their God was unique, but he had 7 states, just as the September was a building, but it had 7 high walls. In many cases, in the septs, the monks would recite this passage to bless the newlywed couple during weddings, between the altars of the Father and the Mother. In fact, this prayer was heard by many in the 7 kingdoms, but usually, people would treat it as a familiar hymn. Only those who had read the Seven-Pointed Star Bible and were familiar with its contents and stories could accurately state that it came from a certain chapter and verse of the Gospel of the Mother. The numerical riddle of 19, 8, and 14 was indeed rigorous, but Illyrio and Varys had no shortage of capable people, especially since they were already familiar with the business of espionage. Soon, Viserys' riddle was locked onto the scripture, and it was determined that only the Book of the Mother in the Seven-Pointed Star Bible satisfied the conditions. From a literal point of view, this was Viserys reporting safety to someone. The prayer was related to weddings, and Illyrio couldn't help but think about what secret information was hidden within. Illyrio also thoroughly examined the dragon bone pendant, but couldn't see any clues. He suspected that this was Viserys' way of one-way communication, with the price and the dragon bone both displayed openly, as if publicized to the public. This further corroborated that Viserys had secret connections with a certain force in the 7 kingdoms. The finger pointed directly at Dorne. Illyrio became increasingly convinced of his guess. After he had Viserys' pendant sold in the shop, he dispatched many more people to keep an eye on the flow of customers, especially those from Westeros, particularly those from Dorne. Pentos was, after all, Illyrio's territory, and he absolutely could not allow any changes that would affect his long-term plans to happen under his nose without him knowing anything. Compared to these potential threats that might affect their planning, the increasingly close relationship between Viserys and his sister was just a trivial matter. The situation had developed to the point where Daenerys was no longer so important to Illyrio. She was no longer a princess who could be exchanged for tens of thousands of Dothraki warriors, but just the sister of the beggar king, deeply cared for by him. But Illyrio seriously doubted whether the beggar king truly had the deep affection for his sister that he showed. Varys would privately call King Robert a fool, yet he still walked on eggshells in front of King Robert. Illyrio finally understood this a little now. Varys was right, dealing with a king was a difficult task. Even the beggar king was much harder to deal with than he'd imagined. "Master, everything you asked for is ready. When shall we send it?" In front of Illyrio, his unsullied eunuch guard reported the matter. Illyrio looked up. The gift boxes containing the dragon bone had already been packed. Along with the gift boxes was a young girl with golden hair and blue eyes, a graceful figure, a hot body, and a lovely appearance. Now, I know some of you are probably wondering when Illyrio is going to kick the bucket. Let me give you a little spoiler. When I first started writing, I planned Illyrio's ending to be similar to Maester Cressen's from the original A Song of Ice and Fire. If you happen to know who Maester Cressen is and what happened to him, then you know what to expect. I'll do my best to write the story I want to tell. Chapter 26, Beauty and the Bear. Viserys frowned as he looked at the extra portion of dragon bones that Illyrio had sent. What is this? He had only just woken up and hadn't had a chance to check on Daenerys yet when he was summoned to Illyrio's study. It's a gift, Your Grace. I may have been too abrupt yesterday, and this is my apology. Illyrio was unfazed by Viserys' frown, explaining with a fawning expression, and I didn't think things through before. You don't even have a personal handmaiden to attend to you. It's truly a lapse in courtesy. He leaned in close, whispering in Viserys' ear, "This is a Lys girl, skilled in the 7 arts of the bedchamber. I bought her specifically for you, and I guarantee you'll be pleased." Viserys was momentarily unsure how to react to Illyrio's sycophantic behavior. He had expected the fat governor to insert someone into his circle eventually, but he hadn't anticipated it being done this way, by openly giving him a bed slave. Such behavior might seem unimaginable to modern people, but in the current world of ice and fire, it was commonplace. Not just in slave cities like Yunkai, Mirian, and Astapor, but even in the relatively milder free cities, and even in the relatively conservative Westeros, it was perfectly normal for powerful figures to gift bed slaves. For these high-ranking officials of Essos, it was just a gift, a way to show their generosity. "You are thoughtful, Illyrio." After a moment of consideration, Viserys finally had a thought. "I'll accept the dragon bones, but I don't need the girl. You did nothing wrong yesterday, I saw what you did, and I know it came from good intentions. If you truly feel regretful, you should find me more dragon bones." He pointed at the box containing the dragon bones, then whispered to the fat governor, "It would be even better if you could find dragon eggs." But Illyrio wouldn't let it go. "You don't like her," he flattered, "how about I get you a handsome boy instead?" It seemed Illyrio was determined to send her. Viserys' expression was serious. "Someone advised me, Illyrio, that a ruler's lack of caution and secrecy brings disaster upon his subordinates. A subordinate's lack of caution and secrecy makes it difficult to succeed, and a lack of caution and secrecy in important matters leads to failure. Don't you know what we're doing?" "Your Grace, I have never revealed any information." Illyrio widened his eyes. "This girl is from Lys and was trained in Yunkai. She's just a bed slave who knows how to please men. Are you being overly suspicious?" Viserys narrowed his eyes and looked at him. Illyrio was putting on an act of being wronged, eager to prove himself. Feeling the man's persistence, Viserys' mood worsened. "Someone told me that a woman's allure is a king's fatal blade. My elder brother, Rhaegar, lost the dynasty because of it, and King Robert will now lose the throne because of it. Do you think there's any truth to this, Governor?" "Your Grace, Illyrio lowered his posture and forced a smile, "I just wanted to send you a handmaiden." At this point, Viserys somewhat regretted the words he had just blurted out. Illyrio was determined to send this handmaiden, and his repeated refusals had put him in a difficult position, creating unnecessary conflict with Illyrio. He was wary of Illyrio, but he absolutely could not show it too directly, rebutting every one of the man's probes. Their relationship on the surface should be closer. Since Illyrio was putting on an act of pleasing him, he should respond with a gentler and more appropriate attitude. As long as the dragon bones were delivered, everything could be endured for now. It was just another spy he had to be wary of. Your Excellency, that's not what I meant. Viserys' tone softened. I spoke rashly just now, in a fit of anger. You wouldn't understand, but I often wake in the dead of night, filled with deep resentment for my elder brother, Rhaegar, who lost the realm for a woman. I know you sent the handmaid out of kindness. I do need someone to attend to me, but I don't need a bed slave. Your Grace, what should we do with the girl then? Illyrio took a step back, asking in a low voice as he looked over at her. She may have overheard some of what we said. If your Grace is worried. Viserys finally realized the ruthless side of the fat governor, though he didn't know if he was truly going to dispose of the girl, who had been a gift to Viserys just 5 minutes earlier. Viserys asked in surprise, You would kill her, Your Excellency? He narrowed his eyes, staring at the fat governor. It seemed he was more concerned with Illyrio's answer than the girl's life. Kill her? SSS. The fat governor gasped, as if frightened by Viserys' question. I was thinking of selling her far away, Your Grace, what do you think? Viserys spoke as if joking, didn't you give her to me? I'll give her back to you. Surely, Illyrio, you aren't too old to use her, are you? Or, do you need her to trade for a handsome boy? If so, you'll have to figure that out yourself. Haha. Haha, Illyrio chuckled along. Your Grace is joking. I am not a king like Your Grace, who has the world in his heart and is not afraid of women. Haha. With that, the fat governor called to his steward, take her down and arrange a room. Viserys, without a hint of politeness, casually ordered, take these to my room. The topic was considered closed. Just as the steward left, and Viserys was pondering an excuse to depart from Illyrio's study, a knock sounded at the door. Illyrio inclined his head apologetically to Viserys, then called out, Come in. What is it? Master, the eunuch guard, a familiar figure at Illyrio's side, announced, the envoy from the Tyrogi lords has arrived. They are outside in the courtyard and request to pay you a visit. Here is their invitation. The eunuch guard respectfully presented a golden-edged invitation to Illyrio. Unexpected guests, Illyrio frowned, accepting the invitation. Why would he come here? He didn't open the invitation, instead looking at Viserys with a troubled expression. Your Grace, this. The fat magister looked as if this situation was unforeseen. Viserys wondered what this was all about. What is it? Your Grace, I must explain. Since this courtyard was used to secretly accommodate you and Princess Daenerys, I haven't invited anyone here. The fat governor looked troubled, explaining in detail, this envoy from the Tyrogi Archon somehow learned I was here and came uninvited. He wants me to connect him with the Dothraki. Your Grace, you may not know, but recently, Tyrosh, Lys, and Myr have been at odds over trade route disputes. Oh. Viserys feigned understanding but subtly hinted, since I came here secretly and am hiding here, this is to be expected. After all, this is your courtyard, Governor. Since it concerns your big business, it's no big deal for me and my sister to avoid it. Your Grace. Illyrio forced a smile, still speaking humbly, please understand, I am just one of many merchant governors in Pentos, and that envoy is the brother of the Tyrogi Archon. If you're just one of many merchant governors in Pentos, why did he come to you? Viserys was secretly on guard, but he maintained an indifferent expression. Then I'll return to my room first, Governor. I had hoped to have lunch with you, but it seems I won't be able to. The fat governor responded respectfully, "Thank you for your understanding, Your Grace." The fat governor and Viserys left the study together. Viserys walked along the corridor towards the guest room, while the fat governor headed toward the door. Viserys wasn't walking quickly. He only entered the building where the guest rooms were located when he could see what the fat governor's guests looked like as they were ushered in. The first to enter were the servants carrying gift boxes. The open boxes contained the finest velvet and brocade from the free cities, high-quality ceramics and enamelware and glass inlaid with jewels. They were led into the living room by Illyrio's guards. Then came Illyrio himself, who was accompanied by a bald, portly middle-aged man with a green beard, dressed in a colorful, luxurious silk outfit. Finally, the two men's guards entered. In between them, a step ahead of the guards and a step behind the courtyard owner and the portly middle-aged man, was a burly man who looked out of place among the others. The burly man was somewhat balding, with dark skin, a tall frame, and thick hair. He didn't wear the standard leather armor of the eunuch guards, but instead wore chainmail and leather, with a dark green outer garment embroidered with a black bear standing on its hind legs. Viserys guessed his identity. Yoram Mormont. Chapter 27, Dreams and Prophecies. Viserys walked with a light step, as if nothing had happened. He passed his own room, where the servants were arranging the dragon bone boxes sent by Illyrio, without a glance. He went straight to Daenerys's door. At this moment, Annie, the maid who often appeared at this time to diligently clean the guest room corridors and would specifically ask if the rooms needed cleaning, had just come upstairs with her cleaning tools. Viserys pretended to knock on Daenerys's door, waited for a moment, and then, receiving no response, turned the handle and entered. As he entered, he met Daenerys coming from the direction of the washroom, as if she had heard the knock and was coming to open the door. Seeing that Daenerys had already changed into her casual clothes, Viserys was a little taken aback. "You're awake." Daenerys caught the fleeting surprise on her brother's face. "Yes, what's wrong?" "A small problem," Viserys explained as if nothing had happened. "Governor Illyrio has guests in his courtyard today, so we'd best stay in our rooms. We'll have lunch here later." He went forward without any hesitation and took Daenerys's hand, finding her temperature normal. He led her to the tea table by the window and sat down. "When did you wake up?" "Just now." Daenerys looked a little nervous, her voice was soft, as if she were plotting something. "I had a dream." Daenerys tried not to let her gaze wander, her eyes fixed on her brother's face. Her heart was filled with a few traces of hesitation, but more was an inexplicable anticipation. Viserys certainly felt Daenerys's expectant gaze. Things had gone a bit beyond his expectations, but he quickly accepted the situation. He casually spoke in common tongue, "The weather is nice today." As he spoke, he tightened his grip on Daenerys's hand, which she had intended to release. He subtly signaled with his eyes and then turned his head to look out the window. Then, he whispered in Valyrian, as if they were conspiring, "What kind of dream?" Daenerys was momentarily at a loss, but before she could fully process it, she instinctively turned her head to look at the view outside the window, though her eyes kept glancing back at her brother. "The sunlight is a bit harsh." She didn't know why she had spoken those words in common tongue, but after she finished, she lowered her voice and replied in Valyrian as concisely as possible, "I dreamed of a dark curtain. I was inside the dark curtain, and I was also outside of it. The dark curtain drew purple dust from my body in the darkness and devoured it, leaving only the me outside. I saw sparks scattered across my body, and I could feel the warm flow of blood in my skin in the dream, like..." She paused, as if to say mother, but she didn't say the word, unsure if it would upset Viserys. "A warm embrace." Since waking up, she had rehearsed this condensed description in common tongue in her head many times. She was a little surprised that she could now speak it fluently in Valyrian in one go. Viserys had never underestimated the future mother of dragons. He took her account as a matter of course, without even realizing that it must have been a rehearsed speech that the timid and shy Daenerys had practiced repeatedly. After listening to Daenerys, he squeezed her palm to indicate he understood. He said, "It is a bit harsh." He then flipped over the cup on the table and poured himself a glass of lemonade. Before his mouth touched the cup, he quietly asked, "Anything else?" Daenerys had already learned this way of speaking. She asked, "So, aren't we going out today?" She whispered, "That's all I remember." "What does it mean?" When she came to her senses, Daenerys found herself asking the question naturally, something she would never have dared to do before. At this moment, Daenerys didn't understand that a feeling called confidence was quietly, little by little, invading the part of her self-perception that had been self-deprecating, ever since she realized her brother was hinting that he needed her help. "We'll stay in the room today." Viserys had no way of knowing that Daenerys' state of mind was quietly changing. He simply answered as usual. "It means your bloodline is awakening. Don't forget, we are true dragon descendants," he answered her question vaguely, using the words her previous brother had said to her countless times, "Burning flames in our blood." Daenerys' heart skipped a beat at Viserys' answer. For the first time, she felt that the words her brother spoke, which sounded like a monk's prayer, might actually be true. Awakening, she heard the description, and it reminded her of the night Viserys was struck by lightning. She found that she had never forgotten what happened then, but she couldn't understand it, couldn't figure it out. The answer to this one question brought her 100 new questions, and now she couldn't even think of what the first new question was, how to ask it. While Daenerys' thoughts were racing, Viserys ended the conversation, "Trust me, Daenerys, you just trust your brother, leave everything to me." After saying that, he released the tightly clasped hand and stood up as if nothing had happened, walking towards the door. "Why hasn't lunch been delivered yet? I'm starving." Viserys opened the door and saw the maid, Annie, was still some distance away. He walked straight over and bossed her around. Yes you, go to the kitchen and see why lunch hasn't been delivered? I'll wait here." Under Viserys' gaze, the maid didn't dare to delay, and quickly put down her work and went towards the kitchen. She looked back once and saw that Viserys was actually standing there waiting. When the maid and the butler appeared in sight, pushing the food cart together, Viserys' deliberately angry expression finally softened slightly. The cautious performance between him and Daenerys in the room just now might have been just a battle of wits with the air. At this point, he finally had time to think about the dream that Daenerys had cautiously told him about just now. The imagery in the dream that Daenerys described was brief but clear enough: a dark curtain, purple dust drawn from the body and devoured. Viserys felt that this was describing him devouring the dragon's soul. The dark curtain should be the mystical imagery of him in Daenerys' dream. As for Daenerys inside and outside, Viserys didn't dare to make a rash judgment. The I and I in the dream existing at the same time often meant that one of them was a non-self part. He guessed that the part that was devoured was the non-self, the dragon soul that entered Daenerys' body, while the outside part was herself. Plus the description of scattered sparks of fire and warm flowing blood, Viserys guessed that it should be that the dragon bone had another kind of mystical substance other than the dragon soul that was absorbed by the magical constitution of Daenerys. He remembered that in the original story, Daenerys had a dragon dream after touching the dragon eggs. She dreamt of a black dragon spewing flames, and she opened her arms to embrace the fire. After being completely consumed by the dragon flame in her dream, she felt cleansed and renewed. Her constitution seemed to change after that. And when she suffered a stillbirth due to the blood magic curse of the witch, it was the heat emanating from the unnoticed stone dragon eggs that helped her recover quickly. A mysterious force then drove her to throw herself into Drogo's funeral pyre along with the dragon eggs, and it was then, at the appearance of the red comet, that the dragons hatched in a miraculous way. There is a dragon soul within the dragon eggs. This was the most plausible inference. Some dragon bones contain residual souls, a fact deduced through practical examination. Viserys certainly hadn't forgotten his mission, to collect the dragon souls of this world, and become the true dragon descendant. However, his magical instincts drove him to devour the residual souls within these dragon bones. The facts also proved that after absorbing these residual souls, they could become a medium for him to project his otherworldly magic. In fact, from the very first day he came to this world, Viserys had a guess and an awareness. The ancient Targaryen prophecy stated, "The dragon has 3 heads." If there were various interpretations of this prophecy before, then with his arrival, and when he manifested his dragon form and appeared in the world, all interpretations would point to him. His arrival would undoubtedly be related to this prophecy, and what kind of relationship would the chosen one born of prophecy have with him? To this, Viserys could only tell himself, "Time will tell, and actions speak louder than words." If the price for him to become a dragon was to devour the souls that originally resided in these dragon eggs and dragon bones, Viserys was already prepared. Then, this was the path he would tread. Of course, all of that was still a long way off. Viserys was, at best, a dragon fire sorcerer who could only perform 1 trick a day, with only 2 dragon scales worth of magical power. Viserys didn't know that Daenerys's description of the dream was already as detailed as possible, but there were still missing parts. Some she dared not say, and some she couldn't express in words. But Daenerys had done well enough. Viserys already took it seriously, but he still didn't take Daenerys's dream too seriously. Instead, confirming Daenerys's trust and closeness to him was what he valued more at the moment. Afterward, they had lunch in Daenerys's room. The siblings each had their own thoughts, so there was only silence at the lunch table. It was around the time they had just finished lunch. The maid Annie led the servants to clear the table, and laughter and chatter from Illyrio and the guests in the courtyard below faintly drifted up from the garden. Viserys wasn't surprised by this. He already knew that after he made it clear that he would wait in Illyrio's courtyard for an opportunity, if he didn't go to the mountain would come to him. He just didn't know what Illyrio was up to, why he was making this dumpling. Chapter 28, Yoram Mormont. Drogokul commands the largest Khalasar, numbering over 40,000 warriors. Illyrio's voice, distant and faint, reached the guest rooms overlooking the garden only if one strained to listen. "Your Excellency, rest assured, I have confirmed information. His Khalasar is now near Dagger Lake on the Golden Plain, moving north along the Rhoyne River. It won't be long before they arrive near Pentos. When a banquet is held at his palace, I will certainly create an opportunity for you." The fat governor's guests chuckled with satisfaction. "Haha, the shrewd Governor Illyrio lives up to his name. But I don't understand, when did the governor become interested in Tyrosha's shipping routes to Dorne?" The voices in the garden grew closer. "Hee, whether by land or sea, having multiple routes is never a bad thing," Illyrio said slyly. "What do you think, Your Excellency?" "Haha, that's true. If I had the governor's business acumen, I wouldn't be doing this thankless job of being an envoy for my brother. Your Excellency flatters me." The two in the garden seemed to have already settled something, and were now just exchanging pleasantries and jokes. After the servants cleared the dining table from Daenerys's room and left, the conversation downstairs had shifted from business to the armored mercenary, who was dressed so differently from everyone else. Illyrio started it. "Your Excellency, the guard behind you is a knight, isn't he?" The word knight even caught Daenerys's attention. She quietly got up from her seat, tiptoed over to her brother Viserys, who was standing by the window and looking down at the garden, and peeked her head out to look. "The real deal," the green-bearded Tyroshi envoy chuckled. "A knight anointed by the High Septon himself. Sir Yora, come forward and speak to the governor. Perhaps you'll find your next employment." Daenerys saw the knight in the garden. He was a middle-aged, burly man, about 40 years old, with thinning hair and dark skin. He was wearing chainmail and leather armor, and a dark green outer coat embroidered with a black bear standing on its hind legs. Daenerys had heard from Viserys that this kind of attire usually meant he was a knight with land, like Sir William Derry, whose brown coat was embroidered with a black farmer. The green-based black bear standing on its hind legs should be his heraldry, but it was a heraldry Daenerys had never heard of. At this moment, Daenerys glanced at her brother's expression and found him expressionless. The knight in the garden spoke, his voice thick and serious, "The mercenary Jorah Mormont greets you, Your Excellency." Illyrio asked with keen interest, "Sir Jorah Mormont, how did a knight, anointed with holy oil, end up leaving Westeros and becoming a mercenary across the narrow sea in Essos?" Jorah's tone was calm and serious. "I am no longer a knight. It's not a glorious past worth mentioning. I did things I'm ashamed of, lost my honor, and was exiled here." "Just a trifling matter," the green-bearded Tyroji envoy interjected, speaking up for the mercenary. "The usurper put a price on his head. He sold some poachers he caught on his own land to our slave traders instead of handing them over to the Night's Watch. Ridiculous laws. Everyone should have the right to dispose of their own property. It was all for money. My actions violated the laws of the Seven Kingdoms, and that is dishonorable." Jorah's voice was filled with a strange sorrow, as if there was more to it. He quickly regained his gruff voice, his face serious and composed. "I am now just a mercenary knight earning a living. If you have any matters you wish to employ me for after the envoy's contract is complete, Your Excellency, please feel free to say so." Sir Jorah was deliberately lowering himself in his words, but coupled with his stern northern face, it gave a convincing sincerity, a natural feeling that this man was trustworthy and would keep his word. "So, you were a knight before," Illyrio took the lead. "You should know a lot about the Seven Kingdoms, then." "I am a northerner from Westeros, Your Excellency," Jorah replied. "If you wish to ask me about matters of the north, perhaps I can answer to your satisfaction. I also have some personal knowledge of the Iron Islands and the Westerlands. As for the other places in the Seven Kingdoms, I only know from my family's education. For example, I know less about many things in Dorne than the envoy here does." Jorah's words seemed modest, but they were actually confident. Since he was near Dorne, with constant trade routes, he dared to say that he knew about as much as the envoy of the Tyroji lords. People were moving in the garden, soon passing beneath Daenerys's window. Viserys' mind stirred. He turned to look at Daenerys, finding her also eavesdropping with great interest. He had an idea. He pulled Daenerys up, saying eagerly, "Come to my room." They quickly walked out of Daenerys's room and into Viserys'. Outside, Illyrio said, "It's like this. I went to King's Landing to do business some time ago. I happened to encounter the naming day tournament of Prince Joffrey. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to wait for the end of the grand event before leaving. Many merchants were betting at the time, but I didn't know the famous knights of the Seven Kingdoms well, so I just bet on Thuras of Myr, the Red Priest. Now, the tournament should have ended at this time, but the results haven't reached Pentos yet. Do you think my bet has a chance of winning?" Outside, Jorah said, "I'd like to know, did the governor bet on the justing or the team tournament?" Viserys' room was now empty. The servants who had moved the dragon bone boxes for him had left, leaving only the box containing the dragon bone gifts in a corner of the room. Viserys led Daenerys into the room, as if eager to hear the conversation outside. He didn't even close the door, letting it remain wide open. He told Daenerys to sit by the window and walked over to the table where the drinks were placed, turning the wine glasses to himself. Daenerys noticed her brother's abnormality. She turned her mind from the garden outside the window and looked at her brother with confusion. The table holding the wine bottles in Viserys' room was positioned between the door and the wall, with Daenerys' room on the other side of that wall. As Daenerys looked at her brother, Viserys was carefully placing an empty goblet in the corner of the doorway. He then meticulously tipped the goblet over and stood there, staring at it. Outside, Illyrio was saying, "What difference does it make?" Outside, Jorah replied, "I know Thuras of Myr. His flaming sword, which burns because it's coated in wildfire, has earned him quite a reputation among the sellswords of the Seven Kingdoms. He can use it to scare an opponent's horse, and with that trick, he often wins the team tournaments at the Seven Kingdoms justing events. But in a joust with lances, he can't use his flaming sword. Illyrio's frustrated voice came through, "Ah, I should have met you sooner." The Tyroji envoy's joking voice came through, "It seems you won't be getting your bet back, Governor Illyrio." Daenerys had lost interest in the conversation outside. She held her breath, watching Viserys, realizing what he was doing. At one point, Daenerys saw Viserys squint. A few breaths later, she saw the expression on her brother's face change. After a while, Daenerys saw her brother reach down and pick up the goblet in the doorway. He then went back to the table as if nothing had happened and poured himself a drink. Footsteps approached the door, and Daenerys looked up to see the maid, Annie, appear in the doorway. She seemed to be heading somewhere. "Oh, Viserys," holding a wine cup, smirked and said, "You came at just the right time. Clean my room while you're at it." The maid bowed her head and said, "Yes, honored guest." Viserys didn't say anything more. He hurried to the window with the wine jug and cup. He continued to eavesdrop on the conversation outside with Daenerys. Outside, Illyrio was asking, "Sir Yora, who do you think will win the jousting tournament? I've heard a little about this tournament from some sailors on merchant ships passing through the docks, but I don't know the full picture or who's participating," Yora replied. "But I heard the name Jaime Lannister. I think it might be him." "Why do you say that?" "To be honest, Governor, I fought him in a tournament, and I've been impressed with him ever since." "You fought him?" "Yes. It was a long time ago." The voices in the garden faded, requiring held breath to hear. Daenerys wasn't paying attention to the conversation outside, but then Viserys asked her, "What do you think of him?" The voices outside were already inaudible. "Who?" Daenerys asked instinctively. At the door, the maid moved quickly, returning with cleaning tools. No one paid her any mind, so she quietly began to clean. "Who else could it be?" "It's that night mercenary," Viserys said. Daenerys's thoughts returned to the topic. She had heard a sense of honor in the mercenary's words, something he himself denied, which reminded her of Sir William Derry. But now that Viserys asked, she wasn't so sure. Daenerys asked vaguely, "He's a knight, isn't he?" Viserys answered just as vaguely, "A knight in exile." Chapter 29, The Handmaiden. As the sounds from the garden faded, Viserys wasn't concerned about the conversation following his interview of Jorah Mormont, the Great Bear. Yes. In Viserys' opinion, it was an interview, arranged specifically for the Beggar King to assess Jorah Mormont. When the Beggar King had nothing, when the exiled king had a grasp of the Seven Kingdoms situation yet lacked practical references, when the exiled monarch yearned for his homeland but had no way to act, how could a knight, also persecuted by the usurper, forced to leave his homeland, wandering in foreign lands, with a deep understanding of the Seven Kingdoms reality, speaking with sincerity, with a solemn demeanor, with martial prowess, and still showing a sense of knightly honor, not be noticed by the Beggar King? Even Daenerys was curious about this mercenary who claimed he was no longer a knight, and logically assumed Viserys would do something. In fact, Viserys was already thinking about how to find an excuse to reasonably explain why he didn't need to recruit, or secretly enlist, such a subordinate, a man who almost had no reason to refuse. Jorah's words revealed that he was about to complete an employment mission for the Tyroji envoy, and Illyrio's flattering attitude towards Viserys was so direct. The fat governor would definitely take action next. But after a covered clash with Illyrio over the handmaiden issue, Viserys understood how desperately Illyrio wanted to plant people around him. From Illyrio's perspective, Viserys had no reason to refuse. Even if Viserys himself was unwilling to appear, Illyrio would enthusiastically take on the task, solving problems for the king and being prepared for any eventuality. This was a conspiracy in the open. If it weren't for the fact that the transmigrator knew the information from the original novel, if it weren't for the foresight to look at things with a problem-finding gaze, everything would have happened naturally. This presented Viserys with a problem. Simply using excuses to refuse could certainly keep spies out, but would this make Illyrio realize Viserys' actual attitude towards him, exposing his true thoughts, and thus prematurely triggering a clear confrontation between them? Weighing the disadvantages. Viserys was very clear that he currently had no advantages at all. Viserys' only advantage was that Illyrio was still willing to be soft, rather than hard, allowing him to mediate. Viserys gradually clarified his thoughts in his mind. He had already obtained the dragon bone resources he wanted, and the false array he had set up was sufficient. He didn't need to disrupt the current ambiguous relationship between them. Occasionally going along with the fat governor's thinking, letting their schemes succeed, and then thinking about whether there was a way to go with the flow, using their own plans against them, was the way he should respond at the moment. Viserys wasn't adept at the scheming and plotting. His mind could only come up with this relatively optimal solution. In the end, it all came down to a lack of confidence. If Viserys had been confident enough, if he'd been in a position of advantage, he could have directly revealed Yora's identity, making his suspicions of the man clear. But doing so now would be too aggressive, like alerting the enemy and potentially pushing Illyrio to the other side. While Viserys was racking his brains, trying to come up with a plan, Daenerys was also trying to guess what her brother was thinking. But she knew too little. Everything Viserys had been doing and saying only added to her confusion. The handmaiden's broom had swept from inside the room to near the doorway, and she was about to go change the mop to wipe the floor. "Wait," Viserys called out, stopping the handmaiden. He gestured to her as if she were a servant. "You, come here." The handmaiden walked forward respectfully. "Honored guest." Viserys stood by the table and asked her in a condescending tone, "I remember your name is Annie, right?" "Yes," the handmaiden replied humbly, "Your Grace." Viserys, without a hint of restraint, asked directly, "I want to know, are you Illyrio's slave, or a contracted worker?" "A slave." The handmaiden maintained her respectful expression, her tone calm. "My master is merciful, he allows me to not wear a collar." "Good." Viserys smiled with satisfaction. He sat down and beckoned her closer. "Come here, closer, let me have a look." The handmaiden lowered her head and obeyed. She was now the only one standing in the room. She could easily see Viserys sitting opposite her. She saw his gaze sweep over her body from head to toe, without any respect, examining her as if she were a piece of merchandise. She heard him appraising her, "Not bad. Decent face, good figure, and diligent." She heard him ordering her, "Kneel." She squatted down. "Look up." She looked up. "Open your mouth." She opened her mouth. Viserys' hand grasped her jaw, his scrutinizing gaze examining inside her mouth, beginning to inspect her teeth and tongue. She heard the final assessment from the other person. "Not bad." The two people in the conversation seemed unconcerned, but Daenerys, because of the suddenness of events, Viserys' actions were completely beyond her expectations. She couldn't help but swallow. She quickly recognized that Viserys was using the method of observing health when the nobles bought slaves to treat the handmaidens. They had seen it when they were wandering in Lys and Volantis. At that time, she occasionally feared such a fate one day. Daenerys's mood fluctuated wildly as Viserys was ordering the handmaiden around. Then, at some point, she felt she should react as if everything was normal. Thinking this, Daenerys casually picked up the water glass on the table and took a sip. Only after the water entered her mouth did she realize it was wine, not lemonade. She suppressed the urge to gasp, swallowing the wine, then cradled the cup in her hands, moving them slightly as if playing with it. No one noticed Daenerys's small movements. Viserys retracted his hand, and the handmaiden struggled to maintain her composure, humbly asking, "Honored guest. That's enough, get up." "No need to wipe the floor," Viserys said, then naturally began to order her around, "Go over there and move the box here." The handmaiden respectfully nodded, bent down, and went to lift the dragon bone box in the corner of Viserys' room to the side of the tea table. Viserys opened the chest without a word and began laying out the dragon bone pieces on the table. As promised, there were 5 raw materials: small, jet-black fragments of untreated bone, clearly weathered by the wind. There were also 5 pieces crafted into luxury items, adorned with jewels, agate, or gold and silver. 5 more were crafted into weapons. The largest was a single curved dragon bone short bow, and the rest were 4 sharply honed arrowheads. Finally, there were purely decorative items, a relatively intact section of spine, a dragon bone skull depicting half a face, and 3 complete finger bones with their claws still attached. Illyrio was certainly generous. A smile spread across Viserys' face, visible to the naked eye. Even Daenerys was captivated by the dazzling array of dragon bone artifacts. Esteemed guest, the handmaiden, who had been standing to the side, couldn't help but ask, "I?" Viserys didn't intend to let her speak. "Annie, be quiet." He called the handmaiden by her name for the first time. "From now on, when I'm speaking or doing things with my sister, you will stand there quietly and serve without my command. Also, you will call me master from now on. I will speak with Illyrio later. You are now my handmaiden." The handmaiden and Daenerys both wore expressions of surprise. Viserys ignored the handmaiden. He turned to Daenerys and said in Valyrian, "The fat magister intends to give me a handmaiden. This one is reliable, and I feel more at ease having her around." Before Daenerys could respond, Viserys asked the handmaiden in the common tongue, "Do you understand what I'm saying?" The handmaiden, still seemingly reeling from the information she'd just received, answered vaguely, "I do not understand, my master." Daenerys hesitated for a moment, but finally couldn't help but speak in Valyrian, "But..." "No buts," Viserys cut her off. "We are the only true dragon descendants in the world. Being cautious is always the right choice." Daenerys understood his meaning and didn't try to argue. But her doubts grew deeper. Viserys saw that Daenerys wasn't asking any more questions, and he didn't know if she truly understood or if it was just her usual silence. Speaking of which, although Viserys looked like he knew what he was doing when he knocked over the wine glass in front of the door and used the silver goblet as a mirror to observe the hallway, he wasn't sure if he had seen any useful information. The handmaiden hadn't appeared from a crack in the wall, the ceiling, or some corner as he had expected. Instead, she had quietly emerged from the empty guest room across from Daenerys. Viserys couldn't imagine how the room across the hall could be used to spy on the other side. The only thing Viserys could confirm was that this handmaiden was likely the one spying on them. She was empty-handed when she came out, moving lightly and cautiously. When she walked towards Viserys' room, she paused very obviously. She was very perceptive and had noticed that Viserys' door wasn't closed. Her first reaction gave her away. Fortunately, Viserys had already picked up the half-tipped wine glass before she noticed. Viserys had always been unwilling to take risks with such probing, because encountering a perceptive person could be a hidden danger. Just now, if he had been a few seconds slower in picking up the wine glass, the other party would definitely have noticed his actions. Fortunately, he was steady enough and had never underestimated the other party's perceptiveness. Viserys' probing had already begun, and once an action started, it couldn't stop there. This was Viserys' way of doing things. So, keeping the handmaiden by his side was his second plan. Since it had changed from suspicion to certainty that the handmaiden was spying on them, keeping her by his side was like putting the hidden eyes in the open. He could observe Illyrio's reaction, and use this relationship to his advantage, ordering her to leave in certain situations. Perhaps, in this way, he could temporarily block the surveillance when necessary. The worst-case scenario was that more than one pair of eyes were watching Viserys and Daenerys. But would they be? Viserys didn't think so, at least not today. As a rule, the more people involved in a secret, the more likely it was to be exposed. Viserys believed that Illyrio understood this principle as well. Chapter 30, Daenerys's Tender Moment. Dragons, such magnificent creatures. Look at these bones, how beautiful, Viserys said to Daenerys in the common tongue, playing with a piece of dragon bone and appearing to be back to his normal self. Can I touch these dragon bones? Daenerys asked bravely. She tried not to look at Annie, the maid who was respectfully standing nearby, and attempted to maintain her usual demeanor. Of course, my dear sister. This was exactly what Viserys wanted. Daenerys reached out to touch the dragon bones. She first picked up a bone fragment closest to her. This fragment was somewhat broken, with severe wind erosion covering various scratches. It was a raw material that hadn't been polished. She carefully examined the fragment. It felt cold and rough to the touch, the scratches were marks of time. Daenerys couldn't see anything special about it. She soon picked up the next one. Her brother didn't stop her. Inspecting one after another, Daenerys examined the dragon bone raw materials that were obviously the least valuable. Aside from their black color, they seemed to be no different from ordinary stones. She then moved on to the luxurious items adorned with jewels, carefully feeling them in her hands and examining them closely with her eyes. She couldn't feel anything, nor could she discern anything. But she said, "How beautiful! Are these really for us?" "They're on loan, actually. I borrowed them all from Illyrio," Viserys explained. "We'll have to return them in the future. You must be wondering why I borrowed these. Can I say it?" Daenerys tried her best to appear normal, and responded, "Why? These things would only gather dust in the hands of others," Viserys said in Valyrian. "Let me tell you, little sister, magic is hidden within the dragon bones, and the same goes for the dragon eggs. We are the descendants of the true dragons. If we can unlock this magic, our goal of restoring the kingdom will be within reach." A hint of fanaticism flickered in Viserys' eyes as he spoke. But Daenerys wasn't sure if he was telling the truth or not, speaking in front of the maid. Daenerys replied in Valyrian, "Really?" She couldn't help but seriously study the expression on Viserys' face. Viserys continued to answer her in Valyrian, "Rumor has it that in the Shadowlands of Asai, there is magic for hatching dragons. If only there were dragon eggs. Dragon bones are readily available, but dragon eggs are hard to find." As he spoke, he casually handed over the dragon bone that Daenerys had been toying with. 2 pieces. Daenerys received them, feeling a subtle warmth. Was it Viserys' hand that warmed it, or was it different from the others? Daenerys fell silent. She would always fall silent when she didn't know what to do. Viserys looked at her expectantly. "Do you think I'm delusional?" "No, I just..." Daenerys racked her brains, not knowing what to say at the moment. She said, "I don't know." Daenerys didn't know what to say, but an impulse in her heart made her bolder. She casually put down the dragon bone object Viserys had given her and reached for the sharpened dragon bone arrowhead. Viserys didn't stop her. She tested the arrowhead's sharpness with her thumb. Ah! In a moment of carelessness, the arrowhead pricked her skin, and a bead of blood welled up on her fingertip. "How careless," Viserys said immediately, hurrying over. He took Daenerys's hand with concern and without hesitation, put her thumb in his mouth. Daenerys felt her finger enveloped in warmth and moisture. After a moment, Viserys stopped, saying with concern, "You are too delicate, Daenerys, and that's not good. Lacks royal bearing." He frowned, thinking. Let me think. From today on, you will come to me every day." He picked up the dragon bone short bow at hand. "I'll teach you how to hold a bow, and it will be exercise." Daenerys couldn't hide the joy in her heart. "Really?" Viserys replied with a serious expression, "Has your brother ever lied to you?" Daenerys pretended not to hear him. "Don't underestimate archery." With that, Viserys stood up and began to demonstrate for Daenerys. With his left hand gripping the bow, and his right hand holding the string, Viserys stood with his feet slightly apart, his body leaning forward slightly. He stared intently in one direction, then raised the bow and drew the string back. In a daze, Daenerys watched her brother stand there with the bow, an air of severity suddenly about him, as if he had become a different person. "Did you see that clearly?" Viserys slowly lowered the bow, relaxing. "Come, it's your turn now." Daenerys stood up as instructed and reached for the short bow that Viserys solemnly offered. For a moment, Daenerys thought of the story of Aegon the Conqueror. Viserys told her, "First, learn how to stand, keep your body straight, feet shoulder-width apart." He placed his hands on Daenerys' shoulders, correcting her habitual head-down posture. He gently nudged her feet apart, so she wouldn't stand with them together, looking timid and unsteady. "Lean forward slightly, while relaxing your shoulders and back. Look up a little. Don't look at me, look over there, at the painting on the wall, do you see it? Don't stare directly, use your peripheral vision." Viserys corrected her stance, gradually making Daenerys look a bit like an archer. Then, with his hands on hers, he indicated that he would teach her hands-on, "Control your breathing. Don't tense up, are you nervous?" Daenerys' heart was pounding. She was trying very hard to control herself. Viserys' voice told her, "Don't answer, control your breathing. Follow me, inhale exhale inhale exhale." With a few controlled breaths, Daenerys' heartbeat gradually calmed. He guided Daenerys' hand to the bow, "Hold the bow. Use your thumbs and index fingers to grip the bow handle, and your other fingers should rest on the bowstring. Don't grip the handle too tightly, you should hold it gently." Daenerys followed his instructions, trying to imitate him. Viserys adjusted her arm position, teaching her, "Good, now start to draw back the bow." As she drew the string, Daenerys' fingers were gently guided by Viserys to grasp the bowstring and slowly pull it back. The bowstring was heavier than Daenerys had imagined, but most of the force came from Viserys' hand. Daenerys tried her best to control her breathing. She remembered to focus on the target. They drew the bow into a powerful arc. Viserys continued to instruct her, "Yes, that's it. When you aim at the target, focus your gaze on the arrow tip. Since there's no arrow now, focus on the hand holding the bow, and imagine the arrow is there. Use your peripheral vision. Don't let your hand shake." The draw took 7 or 8 breaths, until the target and her own hand seemed to distort in Daenerys' eyes. "Remember this feeling. Good, lower the bow." Viserys continued speaking, "Remember, Daenerys, there's no arrow now, so you must slowly release the tension when you lower the bow. Dry firing a bow is very dangerous, and can injure yourself and others, as well as seriously damage the bow. You must keep this in mind." Daenerys' reply was short, "Yes." Viserys hummed in satisfaction, "Good." When the warm hand on hers left, Daenerys couldn't help but feel a little lost. Just now, she tried very hard to listen and learn, but her mind still couldn't help but think about other things. She thought of Aegon the Conqueror and his sister wives Visenya and Rhaenys in the stories, wondering if they had ever had such tender moments. Before the blush could fully rise on her face, Viserys' serious voice interrupted her thoughts, "All right, now you practice on your own. Start with your stance." Too much had happened today, and Annie found it difficult to extract information from the fragmented, trivial events of the day. She felt that apart from the Beggar King's lie in Valyrian dragon bone, dragon egg, magic, the rest was unremarkable, all within expectations. She needed to carefully consider how to report tonight. The Beggar King's reaction when eavesdropping on the garden conversation was worth mentioning. The master would certainly want to know about that, but the Beggar King hid his emotions well, saying very little about the matter. The Beggar King's unusual obsession with dragon bones and dragon eggs was nothing new, but adding today's Valyrian lies might interest the master. She wasn't sure, but she definitely had to mention it. The Beggar King teaching his sister to use a bow was a new development, though his master might not care about it. The Beggar King and his foolish sister growing closer seemed like something worth mentioning, but what did it mean? The girl seemed to adore her brother, and her brother was a man who rarely spoke the truth. Annie and Annie's master were both trying to guess the riddles the beggar king had thrown out, speculating on his flamboyant performance, and probing his background. The beggar king was full of lies. That was Annie's feeling. Among the people she had secretly spied on, this king's cunning ranked among the highest. Even this time, she might be sent to serve him. It just benefited that Liz whore, Doria. Annie didn't know what the master and the beggar king had discussed in secret, but she heard that Doria had been settled in the master's side chamber. That bed slave should have been the beggar king's handmaid, and the master had bought that whore for this purpose. But now the beggar king's handmaid was Annie. Annie knew very well. If the beggar king asked for her, her master wouldn't refuse. Annie couldn't help but think about what might happen to her afterward, only to comfort herself that at least the beggar king wasn't bad-looking, and she could endure it as long as he wasn't too perverted. The master had bought her and taught her to read, just for this day. Chapter 31, Give him something to do. By the time dinner arrived, Illyrio's guests had departed. At the particularly lavish dinner table, the fat governor apologized to Viserys, "Your Grace, please allow me to apologize for today's rudeness. I assure you, such things will not happen again." "You're being too serious, Illyrio," Viserys gave him a way out. "It's just a small matter. This is your courtyard, and such things are commonplace. I understand. But since you insist on apologizing, then I accept your apology, and I hope it can put your mind at ease." He then praised, "There aren't many loyal supporters like you, Illyrio." Illyrio took it seriously, "Thank you for your understanding, Your Grace." "Right, didn't you say you were going to give me a handmaid?" Viserys started a new topic. "I think that maid Annie is quite good, let it be her." "Annie?" Illyrio thought for a moment, as if he had just connected the name with the person. "If your grace wants her to serve by your side, then it is her, this is her good fortune." Just as Annie had thought, her matter was just a trivial thing, and even her master was happy about it. Illyrio quickly moved on to the next topic. "Your Grace, among the accompanying guards of the Tyroji envoy today, there was a knight from the Seven Kingdoms. It is said that he committed some crimes and came to Essos as a mercenary. I chatted with him a bit about the Seven Kingdoms and found that he knows a lot about the Seven Kingdoms, more insightful than ordinary sailors and merchants. I was wondering, does such a person need to be recruited to work for your grace? The nobles of the Seven Kingdoms who fall from grace in Westeros all seem to end up here," Viserys said, not reacting as the portly governor expected. "The Blackfires did, and so did I. I imagine that knight is the same." Viserys didn't want to simply respond to Illyrio's probing. He wanted to stir things up a little and make the other man react. "In fact, I overheard some of your conversation in the garden today, you know, the room is right above it. So, Illyrio, leaving the knight aside for the moment, I heard you talking about the Tyroji shipping lanes to Dorne." Illyrio replied with a beaming, friendly smile, "Yes, your grace. To be frank, the Tyroshi, taking advantage of their geographical location, have always controlled the shipping lanes to Dorne. Now that they've gotten into a dispute with Lys and Myr, it gives those of us watching from the sidelines an opportunity to maneuver." "Excellent, excellent." Viserys had other thoughts in mind but didn't voice them directly. Instead, he said, "That's good, Illyrio, it's beneficial to our cause. It's right to send your business to Westeros, not just Dorne, but the Stormlands, the Reach, the Vale, the North, even Lannisport are all good trade routes. It's good to find more opportunities to do business there." "I think so too, your grace," Illyrio replied. "I believe that after a while, I can offer you the freshest Dorne lemons in Pentos. I look forward to that day." After Viserys said this, he didn't mention Dorne again and steered the conversation back to the knight, Yoram Mormont. "Speaking of that knight, Illyrio, I think you should be clear about what we're going to do. The knight is worth recruiting, but it's too early. Here's what you should do. Wait for him to complete his current commission, and then hire him and find him some work. In the process, you should see what kind of character he has. If he's truly a man of talent, I will recruit him myself in the future. If not, just find an excuse to dismiss him. Your Grace's consideration is still so thoughtful. Although it hadn't met expectations, it was better than the worst-case scenario. Illyrio flattered Viserys, then asked, "In your Grace's opinion, what should I arrange for him to do to test his character?" Viserys seemed to be stumped. After pondering for a long time, he replied, "You can handle it yourself." Illyrio said worriedly, "Your Grace, he's a noble from Westeros. I know very little about the customs and noble etiquette of the Seven Kingdoms. I'm afraid I might ruin your plans." This was also a test. After some thought, Illyrio suspected that Viserys was the type of nobleman who seemed to know what the right thing to do was. He had the theoretical knowledge to satisfy his boastful nature and knew the general direction of things, but when it came to specific matters, he didn't know what to do. For example, the current task was to arrange personnel and test character. Viserys knew that he should arrange things to test character, but he didn't seem to have any idea how to do it. Therefore, he pushed the specific matters to Illyrio, and these matters unrelated to core secrets. He seemed to trust Illyrio. In short, Illyrio thought that this beggar king had a bit of the aura of a superior, was thick-skinned enough, and could put on a show, but he lacked practical experience. It made sense, really. The beggar king never had the chance to actually handle these things. "You can handle it," Viserys replied to the fat governor. "You will be my master of coin in the future, and dealing with the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms is inevitable. Since you say so, then I will certainly handle this matter well." Illyrio agreed and then added a question, "When the time is right, should I let him know who is really employing him?" "No, at that time, if he is truly worth recruiting," Viserys put on an air of authority, "I will recruit him personally." "Yes, Your Majesty." It was more or less what Annie had expected. Her report was most interesting to her master when the beggar king reacted during their eavesdropping on the garden conversation, but she could provide little information, so her master was uninterested and told her to talk about something else. She then recounted the beggar king and his sister's words from today. They had been learning and practicing in front of her, spending the entire afternoon practicing the archer's stance. Her master wasn't particularly concerned, simply acknowledging the information. Compared to the matters that were no different from their expectations, her master was more concerned about how the beggar king had chosen her and pondered for a long time after she finished describing the situation. "Work by his side, don't be eager to show off, just be a normal maidservant," her master cautioned her. "He's not someone who easily trusts others. You just need to be diligent and obey his orders." "Yes," she replied. "He shouldn't do anything to you in the short term, but don't try to seduce him either. He seems to have some strange prejudices about women. Don't use the same tactics on him that you would with young nobles who have never seen a woman," her master advised her. "Also, if he torments you privately." "I know what to do, master," she responded. "Good. I've prepared a new set of clothes for you. Put them on and go to the king." Her master gave her a bag of gifts, and finally said to her, "Don't forget who you are." "Yes, master." Chapter 32, Impulsiveness is a bad habit. A personal handmaiden couldn't exactly be placed anywhere else. So, as night fell, Illyrio had someone move a small bed into the corner of the guest room where Viserys II stayed, next to the washroom. Then, the servants hastily erected a transparent partition of curtains. That would be the new handmaiden's living space. That's how it was to be a personal attendant. In truth, handmaiden was just a polite term. The real identity was that of a slave to the beggar king. The handmaidens around kings across the sea were the real royal handmaidens. When Illyrio had agreed to Viserys' request, Annie was already nominally Viserys' private property, at his beck and call, to be beaten, scolded, or whatever he wished. This was the true face of the free trade city-states with their half-veiled slavery. Viserys, of course, would not forget the handmaiden's other identity, Illyrio's spy. Eyes watching him, shifting from darkness to light, and he wasn't even sure if there might be another pair of eyes watching in secret. Viserys needed to be even more careful. But no matter what was happening behind the scenes, sending this handmaiden at least showed that the two sides were in a honeymoon period. Later, when Viserys wanted to ask Illyrio for something, it would be easier to be direct. Viserys wasn't too worried about his secrets being discovered. He believed that when people lacked the necessary information, it was often difficult for them to piece together the truth. And the secrets he held required imagination. How could people who hadn't seen real magic in 100 years imagine and believe in such things without seeing it with their own eyes? They would put their guesses on more practical things. Like Dorne. Illyrio's repeated probing, while pressing forward step by step, also exposed information to Viserys. They suspected that Viserys' actions were backed by the Dornish. Of course, it made sense. Let them fight wits with the Dornish in the air. Viserys was sitting at the desk in the room, thinking this. At this moment, he was like a college student pretending to study, looking at the dragon bones under the oil lamp as if he was writing a graduation thesis. The handmaiden, Annie, seeing that her new master hadn't given any orders since she entered the room, could only try to approach him respectfully, moving with light steps. If you have nothing to do, stay out of the way, Viserys finally spoke to her, the first words he'd addressed to her tonight. Don't come near me while I'm studying the dragon bones. Yes, master, the maid Annie respectfully retreated to her corner and began to quietly tidy her things. The enormous guest room fell silent. Under the oil lamp, Viserys' shadow cast a huge silhouette across the room. His hands, studying the dragon bones, were close to the lamp's flame, and the shadow cast on the wall resembled a monstrous beast, claws outstretched. When Viserys, seemingly stymied by the dragon bone study, moved to the third bone, a knock sounded on the door. Viserys turned his head towards the door, and saw Annie looking at him, as if waiting for his reaction. Viserys, as a matter of course, instructed her, "Go open the door." Unexpectedly, Daenerys stood outside. Daenerys, seeing the maid opening the door, greeted her blankly, "Annie." Viserys opened his mouth to ask, "What's wrong, Daenerys?" This was the first time Daenerys had come to him on her own. I was practicing my archery stance in my room," she began, a little haltingly at first, but soon her words flowed smoothly. "I don't know if I did something wrong. My shoulder hurts a little." She'd been practicing with great enthusiasm all afternoon. It was no wonder her muscles ached, having been used so intensely for the first time in a while. But anyone could see that this was Daenerys's excuse. To be honest, Viserys had expected this day to come eventually, but he hadn't thought it would be so soon. After the way the original Viserys had treated her so cruelly, he had only treated her like a normal sister. He had reached out to her a few times, designed some psychological hints to get Daenerys to side with him. Maybe the bridge effect really worked, making Daenerys trust him more. That kind of sibling affection, mixed with something more than just brother-sister love, actually allowed Daenerys to overcome the shadow of the years of cruelty she had suffered from the original Viserys, and be bold enough to come seek him out. What had stimulated her? Was it the rapidly growing affection of today? Or was it the handmaidens that Illyrio had sent? Whatever it was, Daenerys's progress was a bit too fast, exceeding Viserys' expectations. A girl who was just beginning to experience love was always prone to being blinded by emotions. Viserys should have thought of this earlier. Daenerys was smart, but she was still too young. Isn't this exactly what he wanted? Viserys composed himself and beckoned to her, "Come here, let me see." Daenerys obediently walked into the room, silently passing by her brother's maid, and approached him. Viserys reached out and pinched Daenerys's shoulder. "Does it hurt here?" This intimate gesture came naturally to him, without any hesitation or embarrassment. Even Daenerys herself didn't find it strange. The soreness in her shoulder made Daenerys wince slightly. "Yes, what's wrong?" Viserys replied seriously, "It's normal. It means you're training correctly, and your form is right. Your shoulders are sore because you haven't trained before. You need to prepare yourself. This pain will accompany you for a long time, until your muscles become firm and strong. When I learned archery at the Red Keep, I was younger than you are now." The instructor at the Red Keep was Sir William. He had the king's backing and made me train archery every day. My shoulders would ache so much after each training session that I couldn't even hold a fork. Anyway, I'm saying the pain is normal. Remember to pour hot water on the sore spots when you take a bath." Daenerys asked again, "Sir William taught you how to shoot a bow?" She remembered that Sir William used to teach Viserys swordsmanship, but he never took it seriously, which often caused Sir William to sigh in private. "Yes." Viserys realized that Daenerys didn't want to go back to her room yet, so he pulled her to sit beside him and chatted with her. "You should still remember how he taught me swordsmanship, Daenerys. I won't hide it from you, I often regret it later, because I had a deep memory of the hardships Sir William made me endure while shooting arrows at the Red Keep. I didn't take it seriously back then. Now that I think about it, sigh." Hearing Viserys sigh, Daenerys didn't know how to respond. Viserys didn't care about Daenerys's reaction. After a few casual remarks, he casually picked up the dragon bone on the table and started studying it under the lamplight again, engrossed in his work. Daenerys first learned that Viserys would meticulously study the dragon bones in his room. She sat beside him for a while, watching his seemingly fruitless efforts. After repeatedly revising the question in her mind, she finally asked, "Brother, what are you doing?" She thought it best to ask casually, as usual. "There's magic hidden in the dragon bones," Viserys replied in Valyrian. "I'm studying how to obtain it." His answer was matter of fact, and the fervor in his eyes seemed genuine, which made Daenerys falter. If this was a secret, why wasn't he concealing it at all? Daenerys's thoughts wandered for a long time, but in the end, she said nothing, silently accompanying him. After a while, Viserys sighed, put down the dragon bone, and covered his face with both hands, his expression showing undisguised disappointment. He rubbed his face, then poured himself a glass of wine and drank it down. As Daenerys was considering how to speak, Viserys seemed to have recovered his spirits. He looked at Daenerys and said, "It's time for my practice. If you're bored, read the storybooks on the desk. If you're tired, go back and take a bath and sleep." Then, without waiting for Daenerys to reply, Viserys stood up under her gaze. He pulled out a dagger and stood in an empty space in the room, focusing intently before beginning to swing it. Again and again. The dagger moved through the air in Viserys' hand, the movements unremarkable. Daenerys sat blankly at the table, momentarily at a loss. Her gaze followed Viserys' oblivious movements, and then she couldn't help but look at Annie, the maidservant, who had been silently waiting in the corner from the beginning. At first, Daenerys wondered what allowed her brother, Viserys, to ignore others and focus on what he was doing. What was he thinking about at that moment? But a minute passed, then a quarter of an hour, then an hour. She watched Viserys, drenched in sweat, the dagger still swinging forward in his hand. Her confusion gradually turned to shock and surprise, and finally to numbness. When Viserys stopped swinging the dagger, Daenerys realized she had thought about many things, but her mind couldn't connect them in a short amount of time. She had gained a completely new understanding of her brother. Viserys was very ordinary. He then instructed, "Annie, go and have someone prepare hot water. I want to take a bath." "Yes, master." Annie immediately set about doing as she was told. Viserys looked at Daenerys, who was clearly shocked. "It's late, Daenerys. You should go back and rest. Remember to take a hot bath. Have sweet dreams." Daenerys had many thoughts swirling in her mind, but only a customary response escaped her lips, "Then, I will go." She was thinking that becoming the thing Visenya and Rhaenys wanted might require more than she had imagined. Viserys watched Daenerys leave, feeling that she should have calmed down a bit from her impulsive emotions. Whatever had triggered her, acting rashly wasn't a good habit to encourage. As for the matter of secretly training, Viserys knew full well. Probably only Daenerys in the courtyard was unaware of this. Chapter 34, A Strange Dream. As she fell asleep, the terrible memories she thought were past flooded back. Viserys glared at her fiercely. "You don't want to wake the dragon, do you?" She was adrift on the sea, thunder and rain raging above. Alone in a small boat, she could be swallowed by the waves at any moment. Far ahead of her was a dark speck. The distance made it seem tiny, but she could still make out an island with a dragon-shaped castle on it. Viserys stood there, towering like a giant. Unable to steer the boat, she could only let the waves carry her there. "You don't want to wake the dragon, do you?" Viserys waved his hand, his fists hammering down on her like a storm. His fingers, like snakes, bit into her flesh, pinching, twisting, and distorting it. He screamed, "Dragonstone, King's Landing, the Iron Throne, the 7 kingdoms, all were taken from us, and we will take them all back." He howled frantically, digging his nails into her skin. Scarlet blood oozed from the scratches on her skin. "Awaken the dragon, hey!" She watched the boat drift closer to the island with the dragon castle. The closer she got, the smaller Viserys' figure grew. The blows against her felt like a breeze. Had she forgotten the pain? The storm seemed to subside, the surging waves dwindling. She saw a door painted red. "Home," she whispered softly. "That's not home. Awaken the dragon, hey!" "Family." She saw half of Viserys' face smiling at her, 2 sounds emanating from his throat simultaneously. "The dragon. Where family is." Her shoulders ached as Viserys smiled at her from the front. She drew closer, the island with the dragon castle just ahead. She mustered her courage and stood up. Viserys gave her an approving look. "Home." Those harsh words vanished on the wind. "Home is where family is." The boat, needing no steering, drew closer. Viserys opened his arms to her. "No." She heard from behind. She turned back. Behind her lay a phantom, lofty hall. Vague ghosts lined the sides of the hall. They vaguely made out the faded garb of ancient kings, clutching pale, flaming swords. Their figures were ethereal, their hair some silver, some golden, some as bright as platinum, their eyes the hues of opal, amethyst, tourmaline, and emerald. "No," they cried. "No." She glanced back, puzzled. The ghost's eyes were filled with reproach, looking at her like a little girl who had done something wrong. The boat needed no steering, she was drifting further and further away from them, closer and closer to Viserys. She felt lost. Then, the boat stopped, resting on the sea. Her brother, Viserys, smiled at her in front of her, and behind her, a gaze of reproach that left her bewildered. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked. No one answered. Darkness enveloped her. Dots of purple starlight streamed from her, swallowed by the ethereal, deep vortex of darkness. When she regained consciousness, she was outside the increasingly familiar darkness. Her body was burning. She lowered her head, seeing more sparks scattered across her body. Where they were, they emitted a searing heat, penetrating her skin and flowing through her bloodstream. "This means your bloodline is awakening. Don't forget, we are descendants of the true dragon, and our blood burns with a raging fire." This was her last thought before she faded into nothingness. She woke suddenly with a taste of rust in her mouth, a sign that she had bitten her lip at some point in her dream. She remembered the bizarre dream and, upon waking, reflected on it carefully. The reproachful gazes of the ghosts left a deep impression on her. "Did I do something wrong?" She asked herself. She couldn't comprehend what that meant. She sat up in bed and leaned against the headboard. Outside the window, the night deepened, a few stars hanging high in the sky. A salty sea breeze blew into the room, making the night as cool as water. Only then did she realize that the pain in her shoulder, which had been tormenting her sleepless nights, seemed less severe. The next day, on her usual after-lunch stroll to the pavilion where the sound of waves could be heard, Dany summoned the courage to whisper her dream to Viserys. For the first time, she saw a look of panic on Viserys' face that hadn't been there since the lightning strike. But Viserys quickly concealed his panic. "Tell me the truth, Dany. Have you dreamt of me being cruel to you in your past dreams? Have you dreamt of ghosts?" "This is the first time I've dreamt of ghosts," Dany answered cautiously. "I'm scared." Her courage was growing, but she couldn't help but glance away as she spoke these words. She glanced out of the corner of her eye, and only added when she saw Viserys was listening intently. "I'm afraid of you. I don't know why, but the past few times, it's always been, suddenly, a wave of fear surged in my heart like the morning tide, only to disappear the next day like the evening tide after the dream." "Oh!" Dany saw a heaviness in Viserys' face she had never felt before. He opened his mouth, as if about to say something, but the words came out as, "Oh." Dany couldn't help but panic. "What's wrong?" "I'm tired from walking," he said suddenly. "Let's just sit here and rest for a while, shall we?" Viserys sat down beside the pavilion, expressionless. He looked out at the narrow sea, his gaze gazing far into the horizon, lost in thought. Viserys had once thought the arrival of the Red Comet would be his opportunity, but now it seemed it might be his doom. Looking back, were the purple dust he'd devoured in his dreams truly dragon spirits? Were they truly just dragon spirits? Were those not-me aspects of Daenerys's dreams truly brought to her by the remnant of the dragon's bones, rather than the magic lurking in her Targaryen blood? He knew that in the novels, when Daenerys was cursed by the witch's black magic, she had a similar dream, the ghosts of ancient kings. That was the moment when Daenerys was about to become the mother of dragons. Unlike the sloppy portrayal in the TV series, in the novels, Daenerys experienced a dream resembling a Kryptonian story. Since then, upon waking, Daenerys has been in a mysterious state. She vaguely believed that some mysterious force had driven her to perform a ritual that resembled a magical sacrifice. Driven by this mysterious force, Daenerys threw herself into the flames, eventually hatching 3 dragons. Were those ghosts in her dreams just hallucinations? Was it a dead object? A magical illusion triggered by the awakening of magical powers? Or was it, due to a lack of magical power, forced to slumber, a magical projection cast through the bloodline by a mysterious being? Viserys had to speculate. If this magical power was rooted in his bloodline, based on the connection between his bloodline and the mysterious being, then when he entered the body of this last Targaryen, devouring his soul and memories, taking over his body, did that mysterious being know? When he gained power by entering Daenerys's dreams, consuming the purple dust, did that mysterious being know? Was his actions disrupting the mysterious being's original plan? The answer was obvious. Viserys had suspected that Daenerys had a divine gaze, assuming it was a god. But because nothing happened, he thought the risk was not great, and he thought the god seemed to condone his actions, or that the god was oblivious. Now it seems that the god was not condoning or oblivious, but simply unable to interfere through reality. The goddess Hylia's mercy made Viserys careless in the world of ice and fire. He was clearly frantically hinting at Daenerys to stay away from Viserys, but for some reason, his wish was unfulfilled. The purple dust Viserys had ingested must have somehow influenced his mystical connection with Daenerys. Honestly, until just now, Viserys had been gloating over the fact that yesterday he had allowed Daenerys to touch 2 dragon bones containing dragon souls, successfully activating their magical power. He had envisioned collecting dragon souls taking his time, as there was still plenty of time before the Red Comet arrived. Even if the number of dragon bones containing dragon souls was small 1/10, 1/20, or even 1/100th, even if only 1 out of 100 was usable, he could remain patient. But now, it seemed he couldn't afford to sit back and relax. From the moment he arrived in this world as Viserys, he had unknowingly made an enemy. Was reconciliation possible? The thought made Viserys want to laugh. Not only was there no place for reconciliation now, but if he wanted to become a dragon, he couldn't do without Daenerys. Would she be willing to give him Daenerys? There was a long silence. Dany felt uneasy because she couldn't confirm Viserys' emotions. She couldn't help but ask boldly, "What are you thinking about? What's wrong?" "Dany," Viserys heard her uneasy question. He turned his head and said seriously, "The road ahead will be difficult. The road ahead is full of dangers and thorns. Will you walk with me?" She didn't understand, but she heard another deeper meaning in it. "What?" "It's okay, give me your hand." Viserys took her hand. "Let's go, keep moving forward." Chapter 35, Narration. "Please be careful. Please be careful." The old hand's sharp eyes, like a hawk, stared directly at the strange man who had warned him. Who is hiding, afraid to show his true face? Just now, the guard Shufu informed the old hand that a visitor, who refused to give his name, had passed the other guards outside the hand's tower and appeared before his personal attendant, demanding an audience. The visitor was a stocky man, wearing muddy, tattered boots and a heavy brown robe made of extremely rough material. His face was obscured by a hooded cloak, and he reeked of sweat. His hands were hidden in the folds of his sleeves. "I beg your pardon," the masked man said in an oddly low voice. "Prime Minister, I request to speak with you privately." The old hand narrowed his eyes and did not respond immediately. The heaviness in the air hung heavy. "Shufu, you will withdraw first." With the old hand's command, the stagnant air finally eased slightly. Only after the door closed and they were alone in the room did the visitor lift his cloak. "Varys," the old hand stated the visitor's name, his face unsurprised, as if he had expected it. "My lord," Varys said, greeting the old hand politely. "Please be careful. I fear someone might seek to harm you." "Someone?" the old hand asked. "Who?" "Ask me, Lord Hand," Varys replied. "I venture to say you know better than I do." The old hand asked his next question, "What do you know?" Varys replied, "You hold a high position of power. They dare not attack you openly. Lord Hand, please be careful with your food. From now on, have someone taste it before you eat." The old hand's eyelids twitched slightly. "You say someone will poison me? Do you have evidence?" Varys said respectfully, "With your wisdom, can't you imagine their methods?" "Who can? Only those unworthy of being human would think of such a thing," the old hand interrupted Varys with a serious face. Varys was not angry. "People say that poison is a woman's weapon." The old Prime Minister did not give him a good face, and cowards and eunuchs. "You don't trust me." Varys sighed, "But this is my honest words, Prime Minister." "What do you know?" The old Prime Minister asked the question again. "You know what I am asking. Your every move is related to state affairs." Varys replied, "Many eyes are watching you. Including you." The old Prime Minister said, "People say that in King's Landing, little birds are everywhere and octopus spiders know everything." Varys showed a sharp and hurtful smile. "No one can know everything. That's just the nonsense of ordinary people, Prime Minister. You should be wise enough to know this. I only know what I should know. This is the duty given to me by the king." The old Prime Minister asked, "Then the king sent you? Does the king know?" "It was my duty to send me here, Lord Hand." "You may mock me, but eunuchs have honor too," Varys said, a little sadly, as if hurt. "You maintain the 7 kingdoms. We all know what the king does every day." The old hand didn't trust him at all. For that statement, I can have your tongue ripped out. You will do to me what you did to Sir Ilan. Sir Ilan was the current king's executioner, a knight of House Payne from the Westerlies. Once, during the reign of King Aerys II, he had served as captain of the guards to Lord Tywin, Hand of the King. Someone reported him claiming that Lord Tywin is the true ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, and the king had his tongue ripped out. I am not Tywin, and the current king is not Aerys II, the old hand asked for the third time. I ask again, what do you know? If you are asking me about the conspiracy between you and Lord Stannis, I tell you the truth, Hand, I know it, and the king knows it too, Varys replied. You intend to have Lord Stannis succeed you as Warden of the East, with your son as his adopted son. But you may not know that the king has privately promised the queen that the position will go to Jaime Lannister, and he wishes your son to be adopted by Lord Tywin. The old hand stared at Varys for a long moment, and the solemn atmosphere in the room made his mouth dry. Humph, the old hand broke the silence. Go away, Varys. Your duty is to the king. To remain loyal to the king, to be impartial, is your duty. Yes, Hand, Varys sighed inwardly. I will keep your words in mind. Varys left. A moment later, the old hand's squire, Suf, knocked on the door. The old Prime Minister asked, Did you see where the visitor went? The stables, the young squire replied. I followed them, but couldn't find anyone. I couldn't find the way. Forget it, go down. We'll have someone keep an eye on the stables from now on. The old hand gave his instructions and waited for the squire to leave before he pulled out the book, Genealogies and Histories of the Principal Nobles of the Seven Kingdoms, which he had borrowed from Grand Maester Pycelle, from the books on the table in the Prime Minister's reception room. The old hand carefully tucked the book into his arms before officially finishing his paperwork for the day and returning to his room. When the old hand returned to his room, his wife, Lady Lisa Tully, was half lying in bed, holding his youngest son, Robert Arryn. Lady Lisa was breastfeeding her 6-year-old son. Robert Arryn had always been frail, so Lisa doted on him, protecting him everywhere and pampering him in everything. She even kept him from being weaned until he was 6 years old. Seeing his child in this state, the old hand felt heartbroken, but he also knew that he was incapable of taking on any responsibility in his current state. Old John knew his age was approaching. He had named several heirs, but they all died before him. He was already old, and his wife had suffered numerous miscarriages before finally giving birth to a frail son, Robert Arryn. His marriage to Lady Lisa was unhappy. During Robert's rebellion, John and his adopted son, Eddard Stark, married Lisa Tully, daughter of Lord Hoster Tully, and Catelyn Tully, respectively, to gain support at Riverrun. By then, old John was old enough to be Lady Lisa's grandfather. My lady, are you still awake? The old hand greeted his wife. Usually, this meant Lady Lisa had something to make a point of, whether it was disciplining a disobedient servant or demanding a position. Lady Lisa had not always been like this. In her youth, Lisa was a beautiful, slender, busty girl, delicate and shy. Now, she was paranoid, harsh and mean, believing that everyone was an enemy. The maids and servants were all afraid of her. Only the old Prime Minister's authority could manage a slight suppression. But not today. Lady Lisa quietly breastfed her child, her hands gently caressing the child in her arms, a smile blooming on her face, like a gentle and loving mother. Hearing her husband's call, Lady Lisa quickly shushed the old Prime Minister. Good boy Robin, darling, Mommy loves you, she sang softly, a lullaby. Good boy Robin, darling, eat well and go to sleep. This heartwarming scene warmed the Prime Minister, tired from a long day of work. He nodded to his wife and quietly walked to the bedroom desk. He habitually wanted to pour himself a glass of wine before bed. The flagon was empty. He glanced at his wife and child, unable to bear the thought of interrupting them. He quietly rose and walked lightly to the door, quietly signaling to his personal attendant, Shofu, to fill him with wine. Soon, his guard returned with the full flagon. Before going to bed, he flipped through the book Genealogies and Histories of the Principal Nobles of the Seven Kingdoms on his desk again. Thinking of what he and Stannis had found, his mood was inexplicably complicated, and he sighed from the bottom of his heart. This terrible fact could plunge the entire dynasty into war if he was not careful. The solution he chose would profoundly affect the direction of the country. The burden was on his shoulders. How difficult it was. With mixed emotions, the old Prime Minister took a sip of wine. Lady Lisa's sleep song was still singing gently. Good Robin Kiss, Mother loves you. Good Robin Kiss, go to sleep sweetly. With Mother here, no one can hurt you. With Mother here, no one can make you afraid. Good Robin Kiss, Mother loves you. Good Robin Kiss, good Robin Kiss. That night, the old Prime Minister fell ill. Chapter 36, The Wind Rises. Acute gastrointestinal illness struck like a whirlwind, knocking down the old man who had served King Robert for many years in a single night. Maester Corman from the Eyrie was the first physician to diagnose the old Prime Minister. Suspecting poisoning, he claimed the Prime Minister suffered from a stomach ailment and often added ice to his wine, affecting his digestive system. He gave Lord Arryn a laxative and pepper syrup, intending to make him vomit out the toxins. However, Lord John's condition continued to worsen. He developed a high fever and became incoherent. The men of the Prime Minister's tower rushed to fetch Maester Pithier that very night, but after examining him, the Maester returned with only heartbreaking news. The Maester said he was powerless to help, the Prime Minister's recovery was hopeless, and that he should be given poppy milk on his deathbed to end his suffering. Lady Lisa did not believe this and resisted for a long time, desperately pleading with the Maester to save her husband, later even sternly questioning why they were not saving him. In his final, feverish moments, the old Prime Minister repeatedly called out the name Robert. People wanted Robert Arryn to be with his father, but Lady Lisa forbade the boy from entering the room, fearing he would catch the disease. His Majesty. King Robert was by the old Prime Minister's side in his final moments. King Robert rushed to the scene and sat by his bedside for a long time, reminiscing with Lord John about happy times, hoping to lift the old Prime Minister's spirits. But the sudden illness was like a raging fire, and the king could only watch helplessly as Lord John's life was consumed by it. When Maester Pacehill suggested for the second time that the old Prime Minister be given poppy milk to ease his suffering, no one objected. Before closing his eyes, the old Prime Minister desperately tried to say something, "The race is strong," but his feverish speech was slurred and indistinct. The old Prime Minister did not survive until the next morning. The only consolation was that the Prime Minister calmed down after drinking the poppy milk. Maester Pacehill assured the king that he died peacefully. The old Prime Minister's funeral was held solemnly in the great cathedral of Baylor. From the king down, everyone was deeply saddened by his sudden passing. The funeral was conducted by the king in his stead the day after the old Prime Minister's death. Lady Lisa and her son Robert Arryn left King's Landing without informing anyone and returned to the Vale. The Master of the Court and the nobles of the royal domains all attended the solemn funeral except for the King's Master of the Sea, Lord Stannis Baratheon, who had disappeared the night the old Prime Minister fell ill and had not attended the King's personal council the following day. The King could not find him and did not want to. No one cared about these two insignificant matters. But when everyone was anticipating who the King would appoint as the new Prime Minister, the King surprised everyone by announcing his journey north to the north to visit Winterfell. When the news reached Illyrio across the narrow sea, the fat governor was so shocked he nearly dropped his cup. He was caught off guard. The changing winds of the Seven Kingdoms and the old Prime Minister's sudden death had left him completely unprepared. Varys' letter stated that the conspiracy had other motives, and even he hadn't found out who had secretly harmed the old Prime Minister. He had only heard rumors and tried to stop it but failed. He had several suspects, but these were meaningless to Illyrio in his letter. Everything had already happened, they should act accordingly. Varys believed that the events had occurred suddenly, and the beggar king and his forces must also be caught off guard. Illyrio needed to seize the opportunity to investigate the beggar king's background, knowing only that the beggar king had one-way communication was far from enough. The old prime minister's sudden death was unexpected, and King Robert's decision to head north was also unforeseen. The more complex the situation, the more they needed to remain calm, do their own work, and wait for the right moment. Illyrio didn't read the letter a second time before burning it. Illyrio frowned, pondering the information while considering how the Griffins would react if the information were sent to them, and how the beggar king would react. News from Pentos to Westeros was usually delayed. For example, Illyrio's sources arrived in Pentos days, even a week, before the rumors actually reached him. At this moment, the discussion in Pentos Harbor was still about Loras Tyrell, the Knight of Flowers, defeating Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, in the tournament on Prince Joffrey's name day. Loras was a rising star in Westeros, his youthful prowess and handsome appearance widely known in Pentos Harbor through the sailors traveling between the Seven Kingdoms. Coincidentally, Viserys learned of the death of his former Hand of the King, Jon Arryn, on the same day as the Duke of Stark in the north, even slightly earlier. I received shocking news today, Your Majesty. I did not wish to disturb you so late at night, Illyrio informed Viserys the day before the first sailors expected to arrive, informed of the upheavals in the Seven Kingdoms. The portly governor himself arrived and, after kicking Viserys' personal maid, Annie, out of the room, announced, Jon Arryn has passed away. Who? Viserys feigned surprise, as if he hadn't heard him clearly. Illyrio's expression was grave. Jon Arryn, the Hand of the King, the usurper, Jon Arryn, Hand of the Seven Kingdoms. Viserys' face lit up with an excited, exaggerated smile. Jon Arryn? He's dead. He seemed incredulous at the sudden joy, asking Illyrio for confirmation, is this news true? My men told me personally that upon learning the news in King's Landing, they immediately spurred their empty ships, loaded only with ballast, back to Pentos. Illyrio, prepared for this, presented a scroll of paper, written in a hastily written script common to all Seven Kingdoms. This is their copy of the obituary, Your Majesty. Viserys' hands trembled as he took the paper, examining it again and again, his fingers damp with sweat. Where are they, your men, Illyrio? Illyrio replied, I arranged for them to rest in the port, I didn't let them come here. Viserys' breathing quickened, reward them. Reward them handsomely. Your Majesty, I've given them gold, as agreed upon. What else would you like to reward them with? Viserys looked around. I have nothing right now, Illyrio. Give each of them double their reward, put it on my tab, along with the dragon bones. I'll repay you all at once in the future. Yes, Your Majesty, Illyrio readily agreed. Is there anything else you require of me? Illyrio, I told you I was lying low, waiting for my opportunity, and now it has arrived. Viserys was beaming with pride. I just didn't expect it to be so soon. Truly, the gods have eyes. Illyrio asked eagerly, what can I do for you, Your Majesty? What can I do? This question made Viserys pause. He slightly suppressed his smug expression and asked seriously and urgently, are there rumors circulating in the Seven Kingdoms, Illyrio? What kind of rumors? Illyrio asked. The one I told you about. Viserys' expression was serious. Well. I'm afraid there aren't any such rumors, Illyrio replied. Perhaps news from the Seven Kingdoms hasn't reached us yet, after all, they're separated by the narrow sea, Your Majesty. Have your men in the Seven Kingdoms keep a close eye on this matter, Illyrio, Viserys said solemnly. This is very important. Yes, Your Majesty. Viserys thought for a moment, then, as if remembering something, asked, has anyone inquired about the dragon bone pendant I asked you to put up for sale? Yes, some have. Illyrio seemed somewhat embarrassed. Oh! Viserys seemed concerned. A collector thought the black and silver chain on the pendant was some kind of novel material. After finding out, he called us profiteers, Your Majesty. Illyrio answered calmly. Viserys was momentarily speechless. Anything else? Nothing else, Your Majesty. All right. Viserys seemed a little uncomfortable. If anyone else inquires, be sure to inform me as soon as possible. Yes. Illyrio seemed to accept all of Viserys' orders without question. Viserys suddenly fell silent, staring at Illyrio, as if deep in thought. Illyrio waited quietly. Finally, Viserys spoke, besides that, prepare a ship for me. Illyrio inquired with concern, what does your majesty intend to do? Viserys did not answer the fat governor's question. He looked at the fat governor with a solemn expression, more serious than ever before. Gods above, I ask you, Illyrio, I am now just a king with nothing. If I were to ask you to assume the duties of Chancellor of the Exchequer right now, would you be willing? Illyrio's expression brightened. It is my honor that your majesty is willing to trust me and command me. Good. I didn't misjudge you. Viserys' eyes glistened with tears. He gave Illyrio a new title, saying, My Chancellor of the Exchequer. Illyrio readily accepted the title, his enthusiasm rising as he asked, Your Majesty, what do you require of me? Viserys sniffed, as if controlling his emotions. After a moment, he said, Before that, I must tell you something. My Chancellor of the Exchequer. You asked me before where my army would come from when the time is right. Now I tell you, I have another plan with a lord of a territory within the 7 kingdoms. He will send troops to help me restore my kingdom. I'm sorry, but I cannot tell you who he is without their consent. But rest assured, we have already planned everything. Hiss. Illyrio's shock was palpable. Your Majesty. You're telling me something so important, I am truly, deeply moved. My Chancellor of the Exchequer, Viserys said, placing a hand on his Chancellor's shoulder to calm him, I'm telling you this to put your mind at ease and to give you more confidence when you do things for me. Illyrio was flattered. What do you want me to do, Your Majesty? My Chancellor of the Exchequer, Viserys stated his request, I want you to go north to Braavos and, in my name and that of King Viserys III, secretly borrow money from the Iron Treasury. Go to Braavos, to Norfolk, to Cornwall and borrow from bankers and merchants you trust. Hearing this task, Illyrio quickly said, If it's money, Your Majesty, I have some wealth. Viserys was prepared. No, even if you are my Chancellor of the Exchequer, a king should not squander the wealth of his subjects. Besides, it's not entirely about money, it's best if they are willing to lend, but it doesn't matter if they aren't. Illyrio looked puzzled. Your real purpose is to subtly spread that rumor when you ask for a loan, remember? 3 crown princes. Illyrio finally showed shock. Your Majesty, isn't this a bit too radical? My Chancellor of the Exchequer, this tactic is called, a new song of the 7 kingdoms, sung simultaneously within and beyond the borders, Viserys said. Do you understand? But what if there's no sound within the borders? What if there's no chaos? Wouldn't we become clowns and targets abroad? Illyrio suspected, no, he was certain. The beggar king beside him had no idea how sudden and unexpected the old prime minister's death had been. The beggar king mistakenly thought this was the right time, and without even consulting the Dornish, he began to act according to the plan they had somehow devised. Your Majesty. Your execution is good enough, but your mind seems a bit off. Viserys' face hardened. You don't want to? Of course I do. Illyrio smiled. By the way, Your Majesty, you mentioned earlier that you wanted me to arrange a ship for you. Yes. Yes, prepare a ship for me. Viserys said, while you travel north, I will travel south to Myr, to Tyros, to list to borrow money from those governors, lords, and wealthy merchants. Of course, borrowing money is a pretense. I'm going to secretly spread that rumor. Illyrio didn't know what to say. He asked with a hint of amusement, "What about Pentos, your majesty?" Viserys said, "That's your hometown. If the usurpers come looking for it, it won't be good if it's exposed. It will pose a threat to you." "You're quite nice." Illyrio almost laughed. "How can I secretly complete this seemingly wonderful plan in another city, achieving it secretly without exposing myself?" While Illyrio remained silent, the beggar king was still envisioning his success. "We'll meet in Volantis, my treasurer." He implied, suggesting that his patron lord would also appear when they arrived in Volantis. The fat governor opened his mouth, but feeling he had just gained the beggar king's trust and shouldn't provoke him while he was in high spirits, he said, "Yes, your majesty." Chapter 37, Ships and People. "My Chancellor of the Exchequer, how are the ship preparations going?" The next evening, as soon as Illyrio returned to his courtyard, Viserys eagerly sought him out. Governor Illyrio chuckled softly, his beard twitching. "Preparations won't be quick. Since we're embarking on a long voyage with such a purpose, we need to maintain some secrecy. I'll prepare some goods, arrange trusted personnel, and have your ship disguise as a merchant vessel, making it easier for you to act covertly, won't it?" Viserys didn't even utter a sound. "You're right." He didn't seem particularly pleased. "But the opportunity is rare, we must set off quickly. The people of the Seven Kingdoms might be waiting for us to act in unison." Illyrio flattered him. "My king, you've waited most of your life, what's a few more days, or even a few more months? The Dornish across the sea haven't made a single move." Viserys pursed his lips. "Did anyone inquire about the dragon bone pendant that was up for sale today?" Illyrio replied, "Still no, your majesty. Speaking of dragon bones, you asked me to replace them with a new batch, which should arrive tomorrow. At least there's some good news, my Chancellor of the Exchequer." By now, Viserys had given up on trying to obtain dragon eggs from Illyrio. Before he was powerful enough, he wasn't willing to let Daenerys handle dragon eggs. The remnants of dragon souls and dragon bones were indeed thin, but their danger level was low. Although dragon bones containing dragon souls were rare after Illyrio replaced several batches, there were often situations where none were found out of 20. He could still rely on dragon bones for safety. If someone knew what Viserys was thinking, they might think he was a coward, shrinking back, but he didn't care. Unrealistic bravery usually only led to a glorious death. He also believed that there were many people smarter and braver than him. If they had his advantages, they might already be on the Iron Throne, transformed into dragons, and chatting with the gods. But his talents are limited, spare him. Eddard Stark taught his wolf cubs, only fear makes one brave. Viserys' bravery will only slowly unfold as his power grows. The more magic he accumulates, the braver he will become. Now that he has some self-defense capabilities, he is increasingly audacious in his demands of Illyrio. The fat governor always readily agrees, seemingly without suspicion, but even with Illyrio's cooperation, Viserys still finds it too slow. Heading south is merely an excuse. His true purpose is to use the opportunity to search for dragon bones in the luxury shops of the various free cities. Viserys has considered openly and extensively recruiting them, but upon careful consideration, he feels that would be a foolish act only a fool would do. Currently, it seems only one unknown entity has discovered his secret and is watching him. If he were to openly do so, it would be tantamount to dancing under the noses of all mystical beings. If he feels that the pressure from a suspected god is not enough, he can certainly do so. Since that dream of the ghost of an ancient king, Daenerys no longer had similar dreams when she came into contact with dragon bones containing dragon souls. Instead, she felt her body being gradually sculpted by sparks outside the dark curtain, the heat in her blood growing ever more intense. Her constitution was visibly good, no matter how strenuous the training, her body always recovered quickly. Viserys dared not let her exert herself too much, fearing that others would notice something amiss. The purple dust that Viserys absorbed through his dreams was decreasing, almost disappearing, but the medium that triggered his magical projections after entering the dream remained unchanged. The unknown entity fell silent. To think positively. Viserys dared not think positively at all. He desperately needed power to fill the void in his uneasy heart. The task he gave Illyrio was a way of giving him an explanation. The Fat Governor and he had been performing against each other for so long, Viserys couldn't let him get nothing out of it. And if he really had a brain fart and acted according to Viserys' plan, then good luck to him, and may the gods bless him. But Illyrio was clearly not out of his mind. He was obviously trying to buy time, occasionally hinting that there was no movement across the sea, giving the seemingly hot-headed Viserys time to calm down. The Fat Governor wanted to wait for news from the Seven Kingdoms. He'd never get that chance. Viserys knew the nonsense he was spouting. The Dornish silence would fuel speculation, but even if Viserys said there were no Dornish, the Fat Governor wouldn't believe him. He'd find his own reasons to convince himself. Viserys was determined to leave. He knew the Fat Governor was never a resolute man. Sooner or later, he'd tire of Viserys' foolish decision and let him go. Just like in the original story, when Viserys insisted on going with Drogo through Dothraki until Drogo fulfilled his promise and gave him the crown, Illyrio tried to dissuade him several times to no avail, and finally let him go. Illyrio, like Varys, was always willing to respect foolish people doing foolish things. Finally, when Viserys questioned Illyrio for the third time, the Fat Governor blinked and said everything was ready. "My king," Illyrio said to Viserys, "the ships I have arranged for you are ready. However, the seas have been turbulent recently, and one ship may not be enough to deal with the rampant pirates and storms. I have taken the liberty of arranging a merchant fleet for you, consisting of 3 ships loaded with goods and disguised. If your majesty wishes, they may depart tomorrow. Captain Glory is the most capable captain under my command. Would you like to see him before departure?" This arrangement was reasonable. Viserys had considerable experience sailing during his time wandering the free trading cities. He also knew that sailing the seas with only a poorly armed merchant ship was indeed unwise. "You're very thoughtful," Viserys readily agreed. To fill in any gaps in the king's knowledge is the mark of a loyal subject. "I thank you, my Chancellor of the Exchequer. Has the captain arrived? I'd like to see him." "It's my duty, your majesty," Illyrio replied. "Captain Grolly is at a nearby inn. Shall I have him come to see you tonight?" "Very well. Your majesty, the king cannot be without guards," Illyrio added. "Should we recruit or hire that exiled knight, Yoram Mormont, to protect you on this journey?" Viserys was still wondering when he would bring this up. He was already surrounded by Illyrio's men, one more wouldn't make a difference. Although Yora was treacherous, he would still be useful. Just as the spy Annie could test poisons for him, having a guard dressed as a knight of the Seven Kingdoms by his side could avoid a lot of trouble. Over this period, Viserys had accumulated more than 10 dragon scales of magical power. He planned to face Yoram Mormont head-on. This amount of magical power would be enough for him to kill the armored knight with his dragon fire ray. Yora and Illyrio may not be of one mind. If King Robert orders Viserys' death, Yoram might assassinate him. However, King Robert's orders will pass through Varys and Illyrio's hands, and as long as Viserys doesn't act recklessly, they won't let him die. But that doesn't mean they can't worry about assassination, it's merely a means to an end. Just like in the books, when Daenerys first faced an assassination attempt, Yora even intervened to save her. What they need is Drogo's army, not Daenerys's corpse. If King Robert were to order Viserys' death, Varys and Illyrio would be happy for Ser Yora to carry it out, using him to teach Viserys a lesson, making him behave and learn how to communicate with his teammates before acting, avoiding impulsive and foolish actions. "That's exactly what I was thinking," Viserys agreed. What tests did you give him? I had him guard my manor outside the city, which is frequently raided by bandits, Illyrio said. The servants at the manor told me that this mercenary is quite different from others. He is highly skilled in martial arts, stern and serious, and ruthless towards bandits, yet he will protect women and children. Sometimes when people talk to him about his homeland, about his former King Robert and Lord Eddard Stark of the North, he will spit and then fall silent. Then arrange for him to come to me, Viserys said. I want to speak with him. Yes, Your Majesty, Illyrio agreed, then added, considering you will be bringing your female relatives, I think it might be a little inconvenient to have only one night with you. The eunuchs guarding the courtyard were originally arranged to protect you. Would you like to bring them with you on this trip? Those pointed hat eunuchs who never even look at me properly will listen to me. Bringing too many guards defeats the purpose of the disguise. Viserys felt the fat governor had already crammed enough men around him, anymore, and he doubted he could handle it alone. How about this? One eunuch guard is enough for the female attendants. I see an older one at the gate, with thick eyebrows, a dark red face, and he looks honest. What's his name? Butch, Your Majesty. His companions call him Blackface Butcher, Illyrio answered seriously. Viserys considered the nickname. He'll do. Chapter 38, The Day of Departure. The Azure Sea was perfectly calm, save for the slow, steady beat of drums and the gentle gliding of oars. The large merchant ship, the Sidurion, groaned, its heavy tow ropes taut, its sails hanging pitifully from the masts, motionless. Ahead lay the summer sun and the playful Jasa, 2 oarsmen, each with 200 oars and a strong crew. Now, the Sidurion, with its large belly, massive sails, and overflowing cargo, could only move forward slowly and painfully, towed by the ropes released from the oarsmen ahead. Even so, standing on the foredeck, holding the gilded sword given to him by Illyrio at his waist, gazing at the clear blue sky, Viserys felt a sense of joy. This morning, after bidding farewell to his treasure at the port, Viserys, along with his sister, his personal maid, his newly recruited knight, and his eunuch guard, a group of 5, boarded the Sidurion, their first stop on their planned journey to Myr. Deeply moved by their bond, the king and his subject held hands and spoke for a long time at the port before reluctantly parting. The night before his departure, Viserys instructed his treasurer to change the price of the dragon bone pendant and solemnly told Illyrio to make sure anyone inquired about it and that he would be informed. He also urged Illyrio to hurry north, to move in unison with him, so that the forces of the 7 kingdoms would see their actions and follow suit. Illyrio readily agreed to the king's orders, and the king's riddle was quickly deciphered. Warriors, grant them courage and victory, and they will wield your shining sword to cleanse the world of all evil. The prayer came from the Warriors chapter of the 7-Star Bible, the words of a warrior blessing the 44 sons of Hugo, king of the hills. The king was clearly in high spirits and full of confidence, ready to embark on his great cause of restoring his kingdom. Your Excellency, Captain Glory spoke to Viserys in Valyrian with a heavy Pentos accent, it seems we'll encounter a storm on our voyage. The weather in the narrow sea is always like this, there's no wind for days before and after a storm. Glory was a middle-aged captain with dark hair and a full black beard, an old Pentos like his master, Illyrio. Glory possessed an old-fashioned composure and experience, and spoke Common, Valyrian, and several other regional dialects. He claimed to have been sailing for 20 years, having visited the Summer Sea, the Jade Sea, and Sotros. The route from Pentos to the Summer Sea was the one he knew best. The night Viserys met Glory, Illyrio had instructed Glory to treat Viserys as he would treat him, to address Viserys as Your Excellency. Glory had given the Your Excellency the best cabin on the merchant ship, at least outwardly, he treated Viserys with utmost respect. Viserys said, I'm not afraid of storms, I only hope that after the storm comes the north wind, so we can get to Myr quickly. The narrow sea was often stormy, and Viserys and Daenerys had crossed it dozens of times during their exile, fleeing from one free city-state to another. Viserys always said they were just one step ahead of the usurper's assassins. Life at sea occupied almost half of their exile. As the ship sailed away from Pentos, Viserys saw a rare, genuine smile on Daenerys's face. Undoubtedly, her time in Pentos had been very difficult. The pungent saltiness of the sea air on the ship, and the feeling of freedom she experienced upon seeing the boundless ocean under the vast sky, brought her joy. While Viserys spoke to the captain, she quietly leaned against the deck railing, watching the dolphins swimming and playing beside the Sijuan, occasionally eavesdropping on Viserys' conversations with others. She would never have dared to do this before. "My lord, a north wind is a terrible sign of winter. And even with the wind, it will take 7 or 8 days to reach Myr." Sir Jorah Mormont came to the foredeck and stood beside Viserys. "We've just left Pentos Bay." Even in this heat, Sir Jorah preferred to sweat profusely, wearing his chainmail and leather coat, his dark green cloak embroidered with a man of pearl bear always by his side. Sir Jorah had a bull-like neck and shoulders, his arms and chest covered in thick black hair, while his head was completely bald. He naturally gave off an impression of honesty and kindness, and his smile always put those he met at ease. The knight Illyrio introduced him to Viserys. The exiled knight, upon hearing Viserys' identity, offered to serve him. "You offer your allegiance to me on our first meeting." Viserys didn't rush to agree, asking his request, "What do you want from me?" "Honor," he said. "Serving the king is an honor." Viserys said, "You're not being honest enough, that's not the mark of a knight. This is no empty boast. Fighting for the king brings me honor," he said earnestly. "I was banished by King Robert, stripped of everything, and lost all. I wish to serve you, hoping you will grant me honor. Only by helping you regain the throne can I hope to return home." It was a plausible excuse, and Viserys, not wanting to listen to his lies any longer, readily agreed to his allegiance, and Mormont became his bodyguard. Viserys kept Jorah for the same reason he had initially chosen to stay in the court of Illyrio: never underestimate the power and resolve that high-ranking figures like King Robert and Varys could mobilize. The beggar king was destined to be surrounded by such people, whether he was like this now, or sought other paths as a mercenary or something else. The wolf pit next to him would be occupied by either Jorah, Kara, Raju, or some other unknown character not mentioned in the original work. He could directly identify Jorah as a wolf pit based on the text. But if it were someone more talented, without mind-reading abilities, how could he be sure who would rise to power, gradually becoming his right-hand man, and ultimately betray him? Would he be expected to be shocked and say, "Are you still around, Brutus?" Viserys asked him, "Is your horse settled?" Just as Jorah refused to remove his chain mail, he also refused to leave his horse with Illyrio, so the captain cleared a space for it below deck. "Yes, sir," they all replied in unison, addressing him as Lord Viserys. "You've come at the right time. It's so hot, tell me what the north is like." Captain Glory, not wanting to listen in, made an excuse to leave. Butch, the eunuch guarding Daenerys, was a taciturn man. He could go an entire day without uttering a word. Jorah was sweating profusely from the sun, his throat burning, but he still responded respectfully, "What would you like to hear, my lord?" Viserys casually struck up a conversation with him, "Is there snow in the north at this time of year?" Jon Snow casually grabbed a handful of snow from the ground, rolled it into a snowball in his hand, and threw it at the trees in front of him. The snowball exploded in the middle of a tree trunk 30 paces away, leaving a puddle of snow on its surface. He mentally cheered for himself. Ghost raised its head, its red eyes staring at the spot where Jon had thrown the snowball for a moment, then quietly sat down at Jon's feet. Jon bent down and affectionately stroked its head. "Watch closely, the next one, I can hit it next one too." Ghost grew very quickly. When he first found it, it was barely bigger than Jon's palm, but in just over a week, it had grown to be about the same size as the cats in the castle. At first, Jon could only feed it with a towel soaked in milk, worrying every day that it would die. Now, it could eat minced meat, chewing on chicken bones incessantly, and growing bigger every day. News of the king's impending arrival at Winterfell had spread throughout the city. Although the king had already departed some time before the news reached Winterfell, the journey from King's Landing to Winterfell was long, and the king's carriage was moving slowly. Lord Eddard predicted the king would arrive in 2 weeks. Upon receiving the news, Lord Eddard immediately dispatched Captain Jory Caesar with the honor guard south along the King's Road, instructing him to meet the king at the Wheel Palace before he crossed the neck. Along the route from the First Men's Graveyard to Winterfell, there were few inns or towns to rest in. After nightfall, the king and his entourage would have to camp wherever they could find shelter. Without the help of northerners familiar with the terrain, they feared they would leave a bad impression. Inside the city, Jon's half-brothers and sister were receiving urgent training in the etiquette of meeting the royal family. No one had time to train or play with Jon. Jon had wanted to beg his father for permission to go out of town with the patrol. Wild men had been crossing the wall lately, but Lord Eddard was always busy, and by the time Jon thought he had time, the patrol had already left. He found the town unusually hot these past few days and couldn't stand it. So he rode out of town himself, riding for a while on the road between Winterfell and the now deserted Winter Town. He was resting near the city gate. After riding and breathing in some cool air, he felt much better. Lately, Jon had been having trouble sleeping at night, frequently having vivid dreams of a vast, cloud-shrouded sea. Jon had never seen the sea, only getting a vague impression from the maesters and the books in Winterfell's archives. He didn't understand why he had such dreams. This had improved considerably after he found Ghost and devoted himself to raising it, but occasionally he was still troubled by these vague and strange dreams. A new snowball was formed in his hands. He tossed it casually, and it hit the tree trunk squarely. Before he could cheer himself on, a soft thud came from behind him, and a snowball exploded a few steps away. He and Ghost turned around and saw a small figure waving at him from the south gate wall. Jon couldn't help but smile, judging from the look. His little sister Arya must have skipped etiquette class again. Jon led his horse back to the city, handed it to the stable boy in the stable, and quickly climbed the stone steps up the wall. When Jon arrived, Arya was teasing her wolf cub. "Little sister, shouldn't you be in etiquette class right now?" Arya made a face at him. "Etiquette class? It's more tiring than sewing class." She picked up the wolf cub and placed it next to Ghost, who was quietly following behind Jon. "See, it's because I didn't spend as much time with Nymeria as you do that she didn't grow as big as Ghost." Arya named the wolf cub after the legendary warrior queen who led her people across the narrow sea. Ghost was the fastest growing and tallest of the wolves. It sniffed Nymeria, who was beside Arya, gently nibbled her ear, and then sat quietly at Jon's feet. Jon actually wanted to talk to Arya longer, but at the last minute, he warned her with a grown-up tone, "If you're gone too long, Sister Morden will definitely send someone to inform your mother. If Lady Stark finds out you skipped class again, you definitely won't be able to come out of your room to see us when we're training in the training grounds." "I know. Why do you talk like father?" Arya got up with a helpless look, shoving the wolf cub at Jon. "Jon, watch over Nymeria for me. I'll come back to find her after class." Arya was always quick and decisive. As soon as she finished speaking, she got up and ran off. Luckily, there was a bridge connecting the main castle and the armory at the south gate, otherwise, she definitely wouldn't have been able to run back and forth between the walls and the main castle in the short 10-odd minutes during Sister Morden's break in etiquette class. Jon, carrying Nymeria, watched his little sister run away, a wide grin spreading across his face. His mood instantly brightened. Night Viserys left Pentos. A ghost market on the coast outside Pentos. "What? The market's closed." Viserys had left in a hurry. Illyrio still had to send people to clean up the mess. To meet the Beggar King's demand for dragon bones, he had found some cheap goods, thinking they would be useful for a long time. Acquiring low-priced goods of dubious origin was one of the merchant governor's businesses. His connections had recently attracted many people to sell stolen goods. "I brought some good stuff this time," a thin, scarred man said indignantly. "You won't even take a look." The person in charge ignored him. "Go somewhere else. Good things always sell. I'm closing up shop," he pleaded. "Nowhere else can I find prices as fair as yours. Take a look." The person in charge ignored him and left. "Damn it!" After the man was gone, he cursed. "What a wasted trip!" He grumbled as he left, not intending to look elsewhere, and went straight back to his fishing boat. Before the man could row away, the manager, now dressed differently, approached him and got straight to the point. "Look what good stuff this is. If it's genuine, my master won't take it, but I can." The man smiled broadly, put his hands in his pockets, and poured a crystalline object from a tattered bag. The manager's eyes lit up. Calling it dragon bone was an understatement. It was more like a sapphire, the dragon bone serving as an embellishment. Such a pure sapphire was rare, a deep sea blue, beautifully transparent and virtually flawless. They were regulars, and both parties seemed sincere. The transaction was quickly completed in the fishing boat's hold. Neither of them realized then that this would be their last transaction. That night, the fisherman, who made his living by fishing and occasionally acquired ill-gotten gains, drowned after falling into the sea from his boat while drunk. A few days later, this business manager, many levels below Illyrio, became one of the drunkards who drowned in the Pentos Canal. "Your Majesty the Queen, Your Majesty, Your Grace, Your Highness, Your Excellency, my Lord. I've noticed some people get hung up on titles. Actually, English has many honorifics. In fact, besides these, George R.R. Martin used a wide variety of titles for powerful figures, employing many Old English words. There's bound to be one that fits."